Salutations from space. I'm Gemini Brett, and it's an honor to have been invited to speak at the Crocker Art Museum in Sacramento, California for this super cool event, Art Mix Cosmos, blending the mystical with the scientific on this night of celestial exploration. It was a really fun event where astrologers and astronomers, those who are asking the why of the sky and the what of the sky, got to come together. And so I was honored to be invited to present this material. I'm recording it again now because unfortunately the recording of the talk had a distorted audio file. So here at home, I'll be able to take a little bit more time with the material also. But the nature of the talk was this: what is the very real astronomy of the tropical zodiac? And really, it's a response to the principal evidence utilized by astronomers today to debunk astrology, at least tropical astrology, which is that the signs and the constellations don't align. And this is true, but this does not mean that astrology is fake. So we're going to look at the very real astronomy of the tropical zodiac today. My name is Gemini Brett, and my practice, I guess the paradigm of astrology that I'm learning and sharing and teaching and connecting to and through, I call sacred astronomy. So many of my astrological peers, I think this of me because I'm known as a kind of an astronomy for astrologers expert. That I'm out with telescopes. Astrologer friends always love to tell me about the big telescope their uncle has or whatever. And I think the telescopes are super cool. And I love some of the information that comes to them through the hidden places, like the first image that we've been able to put together of a black hole very recently. But the observatories that I'm connecting to from my learning of sacred astronomy look a lot more like this. This is Stonehenge, which is aligned to the sacred astronomy. Okay, Newgrange, Passage Grave, north of there. This is a solstice alignment at Luxor in Kemet, the land we now call Egypt. This is equinox, either vernal or autumnal, in Chichen Itza, the pyramid of Kukulkan, where a shadow serpent is seen crawling down one of these ramps shortly after sunrise at equinox time. In the United States, where I live, a land now called the United States, there's an ancient site known as Chimney Rock that keeps the great lunar standstill cycle, a cycle of about 18 and a half years, right? So modern astronomers didn't want to believe the ancients even knew about this cycle, but of course they did because they were connected to nature. And I will argue that astrology is so much more than a symbolic language. It is the poetic breath of nature. Here's an artist's image of Newgrange earthworks near Columbus, Ohio, that also kept the great 18.618 year lunar standstill cycle. And it has been preserved in a strange way. Newark Earthworks is now Mound Builders Golf Course. Not far away, the great effigy Serpent Mound, which also keeps the solstices and the equinoxes through its geometrical alignments and layout and keeps this great lunar standstill cycle. So I'm a great fan of the wizards that built these places and of the wizards of astrology and astronomy like these. We're looking at Johannes Kepler, right? Who is a great hero of astronomy, for he is the one who proved that the orbits are not circles, but rather ellipses. And perhaps he was so tuned to sorting out how these great cycles operated because of his astrological pursuits. Here's a quote from Kepler: "The soul of the newly born baby is marked for life by the pattern of the stars at the moment it comes into the world, unconsciously remembers it, and remains sensitive to the return of configurations of a similar kind." I found this quote, which is all about Earth at goodreads.com. We'll get back to that. But I would just say, this is kind of this is an advanced statement of what astrology is, like for the cynics. So I just want to take us into what I feel is the primary theory of astrology and show that the tropical zodiac, anyway, is all about the Earth. It is Earth astrology. By suggesting this thesis, the thesis, I believe, of astrology, which is really the quality of our experience of the heavens versus the quantity of the heavens, the measurable astronomical, it is this. It's that the astronomical cycles participate with our energetic experience as beings on Earth. And my favorite experience that we all have to support the truth of this claim is through the primary motion of Earth, okay? Earth spins in 24 hours time. This is the diurnal motion, and it brings us day and night, right? So how do you feel at 3 a.m. versus 3 p.m.? Nobody can argue that they have a similar energetic experience at those two times, right? This is simple biology. It's expressed by all the animals, the plants alike, everything on Earth. This diurnal motion defines the cardinal directions, for we spin on the polar axis, which I like to poetically call the spine of Gaia, and that moves from the heart of Earth through true north and true south. Okay, this is the plane of the spin, the primary motion, the diurnal or daily motion, day and night. And the Earth spins west to east, but we are on Earth. So our witness of this primary motion is the east to west spin of the heavens, which in the northern sky, it's about the north celestial pole, and it is a counterclockwise motion about the star Polaris in our time. I believe this is an ancient depiction of this primary motion, or daily spin of the Earth, or from feet on the Earth's point of view, this daily spin of the heavens. I believe this is an ancient depiction from Northern Hemisphere artists, ancient artists of the northern sky, which is circumpolar, right? Currently about Polaris. So as I said earlier, I found this quote at goodreads.com. But when I add the tags, you'll see why it kind of felt like a bad read to an astrologer like me. Astrology, nonsense, superstition. Is astrology just superstitious nonsense? I mean, this is what I was taught about astrology in science class, right? That's just archaic, superstitious nonsense. And we'll see some quotes from modern astronomers about astrology, but this is just a meme I found online. Astrology, the mass cultural delusion that the sun's apparent position relative to arbitrarily defined constellations at the time of your birth somehow affects your personality. All right. And here's the horoscopes from Cosmo magazine. All right, my name is Gemini Brett, but the sun was aligned to the tropical sign of Scorpio when I was born, so I would read the Scorpio bit, I guess, sun sign astrology, where I find, among other things, that I should buy a $175 ring. Okay, if this is what astrology is, I agree with this meme, right? But this is not what astrology is. And those of us who study this great sacred science, yes, I'll say science, and this incredible craft, this art of astrology, know that you are so much more than your sun sign. Astrology is not suggesting that there are only 12 kinds of beings completely determined by the sign of the sun. All right, so let's see what NASA has to say. They don't say too much about astrology, but one place where we can find something that NASA has written, right? Why NASA? Because I think most see NASA as the authorities of all things space today. It's debatable, but NASA's Space Place is a place where they educate children about all things astronomy. So what if we type "what is astrology" here in the search box? We are shown two articles, and one, constellations in the calendar, we will go take a look at. All right, so we see our friend here. Astrology is not science. All right, first things first, astrology is not astronomy. Astronomy is the scientific study of everything in outer space. Astronomers and other scientists know that stars many light years away have no effect on the ordinary activities of humans on Earth. Well, this great astronomer, Johannes Kepler, it seems would disagree, or did disagree. He said, "I much prefer the sharpest criticism of a single intelligent man to the thoughtless approval of the," oh, sorry, not the NAS, "of the masses." Johannes Kepler. All right, so we go on to read, astrology is not science. Astrology is something else. It's not science. No one has shown that astrology can be used to predict the future or describe what people are like based only on their birth date. Still, like reading fantasy stories, many people enjoy reading their astrological forecast or horoscope in the newspaper every day. So NASA at Space Place in this article are teaching our kids that astrology is not science, and in fact, astrology is like fantasy stories, and people read their newspaper horoscope. Okay, is this what Kepler thought? No. What about Galileo, who's over here on the right? Kepler's sun sign is Capricorn. So this idea of you are your sun sign, if we look for Kepler's commandment from Cosmo magazine this month, we see that he should buy a belt. And fortunately, it's a little cheaper, $50 for the Capricorn belt. Okay, so again, I don't agree that this is what astrology is. All right, this is what the masses are taught to believe astrology is, that it's simply sun sign. Johannes Kepler is a Capricorn. Sun was in the sign of Capricorn when he was born on December 27th, 1571. Okay. His horoscope, right, is a newspaper column. Well, not really. Actually, the horoscope gets a lot more dynamic, the horoscope, if we consider it to be the chart, when we simply bring in the moon. Here we see Johannes Kepler, Capricorn sun, Gemini moon. All right, and now 12 signs available to each sun and moon, and we have 144 possibilities, much more dynamic than 12, right? But what if we bring in all of these? All right, these are the planets and the lunar nodes, all of which were well known in Kepler's time, the visible planets, right? Moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and also the lunar nodes, which from Earth's point of view are where the paths of sun and moon cross. And this has become a much more dynamic equation, many variables, okay? Bringing in some of the planets discovered since Kepler's death, beginning with Uranus in 1781 by William Herschel. This from Roger Beck's A Brief History of Ancient Astrology. To say, as I did at the start of section 2, that the positions of the planets in the signs are the primary data of astrology is not quite accurate. There is another datum of equal importance, the sign, strictly the degree of the sign, which happens to be rising in the east at the time of birth. The rising sign or degree is known as the ascendant. In the Greek term was horoscopos, literally hour watcher, the word which gives us English horoscope. Hour watcher, hour marker is another translation for the ascendant, or the horoscopos, okay? So horoscope is something that is applied by the masses to the column in the magazine or newspaper that tells you which belt or ring to buy in some cases, as we saw earlier. Horoscope is often a word that is used to describe in modern times the entire birth chart, right, for a person or a moment, like the beginning of a business or something like this. But truthfully, horoscopos, the hour marker, applies to this part of a chart, the rising sign. And most astrologers who are deep in this study will suggest that if you do read the horoscope column of a newspaper or magazine, etc., or perhaps more educated astrological articles, then you want to do so for your rising sign, not for the sun sign, for the horoscopus, for it defines your astrological houses. We're not going to get too deep into the astrology today, but I will show here, I'm circling 24 degrees and 25 minutes Gemini on the rise at the time of Kepler's birth. Perhaps this data came from astro.com, an incredible site. But here's another look at Kepler's nativity or birth. 27 degrees and 19 minutes, tropical Taurus on the rise. And why I lean towards this as his horoscopus or hour marker is because this is a chart that was written in Kepler's own hand, where he shows us that 27 degrees and 19 minutes Taurus at the ascendant, right? Which you can see if you know how to read one of these old square charts. Here's another old square chart. This one not drawn by Kepler, this one drawn by Galileo. Now, it wasn't until recent that I discovered that Galileo was also an astrologer. And thanks to Nick Collerstrom for writing this very amazing article, which you can find at skyscript.co.uk, or by searching online Galileo's astrology in Nick Collerstrom's name. I'll just read at the top here. Galileo, like Kepler, was a mathematicus, a term which had a threefold meaning as referred to mathematics, astrology, and astronomy. Okay, you can go on. I really highly recommend reading this article. One thing that I found there to be very interesting was that pretty recently, I think it was in 1993, a monk found old records, I shouldn't say ancient, but old records from Galileo's time, in which he was invited for an interview in front of the Inquisition. And this was decades before the meeting that we are well aware of or taught in school, which is the one that led to Galileo's house arrest, right? That he was actually invited many years before this to speak to the Inquisition about his practice of predictive astrology. Now, I wasn't taught this in my science class, but the truth is anybody who was teaching medicine in university, as Galileo was in his life and did so in Florence, Italy, anyone who was teaching medicine at that time also had to know and to teach astrology, because you wouldn't diagnose a patient medically without looking at the birth chart and the chart of the time that they come into the office. And this was universal in the time of the Renaissance in the Western traditions. But there's a difference between, there's a difference between medical astrology in that sense and predictive astrology, which is to say, oh, this will be the date of your death, or this is how many children you have, or whatever, which was a huge no-no in the eyes of the church, right? Because now we're looking at fate, right? All right, so I was very interested to find this chart that was drawn in Galileo's pen. And this chart is for Cosimo de' Medici II. All right. Did you know that the so-called Galilean moons, why are they called that? Because Galileo put a telescope on these four largest moons of Jupiter, which we call Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto. Do you know that they were not named that by Galileo? In fact, interestingly, those names were suggested by Kepler. But Galileo suggested that they be named for the four sons of Cosimo de' Medici I. And, maybe this was a money grab, which I suggest perhaps this was William Herschel, who discovered in modern times Uranus. This was in 1781 with his sister Caroline Herschel, not often enough mentioned. He suggested that this new planet, and this was the first time that we had to name a planet, right? Discovered with a telescope in 1781. He thought he found a comet. They tracked it for some days, and not just he, but many astronomers, having discovered this new light, and saw that its orbital motion was not that of a comet at all, but of a planet. All right, so for the first time, we had to name a planet. And he suggested George, or the Georgian star. Why? Because King George was paying the bills, right? So, I mean, maybe Galileo casting Medici's chart or that for his son, and suggesting that these 4 largest moons of Jupiter, which he saw through a telescope, be named after the 4 sons of Medici. Maybe like this, it was a bit of a money grab. But again, we have more evidence of Galileo practicing not just astrology, but predictive astrology. At least we have evidence that the church believed that he was, or the Inquisition, the Catholic Church believed that he was, because he was invited to speak to them about that. All right, so I highly recommend you read about that. Now, Uranus. All right, Galileo's Pisces sun aligned in a strong square aspect to the planet Uranus, which was not known in his time. But this Sun-Uranus square, especially in these signs, Pisces, the mystic, and Sagittarius, the spiritual seeker, and Uranus can bring a lot of the heretical and the genius. I just want to point that out to the astrologers in the crowd. This is a pretty cool thing. I think that's enough. Let's look at Galileo's horoscopus, his hour marker, his hour watcher, the 22nd degree of tropical Leo, or perhaps the 15th degree. And why do I say that? Simply because that places the moon right at the midheaven. And why would that matter? Because the midheaven is a place in astrology that we look for legacy, for vocation, career. And of course, the moon had much to do with Galileo's career and legacy. Here are some drawings in his pen of the craters on the moon. It said that the first drawing of the craters actually featured Cosimo's birth chart on the backside, though unfinished at that time. But these are charts in Galileo's pen of his nativity. And it seems that he was trying to sort out his birth time. We call this a rectification in astrology. There's a couple different suggestions, actually 2 different dates. But one puts this 14 degrees and 33 minutes Leo at the horoscopus, at the ascendant. And so that's why I've chosen to show this chart for Galileo. Pisa, Italy, February 16th, 1564, 3:40 and 44 p.m. All right, and it's a chart that we're going to look at a bunch throughout our journey here. So this is an interesting chart, an astrocartography map or astrolocation map, and astrologers who know how to read these things will see that at this time, and this is the time of Galileo's birth, or at least this time, the moon was at the midheaven near Pisa, Italy, where he was born, shown there as that red cross, and that it was absolutely at the midheaven at Florence, where he would end up being a professor. This is maybe an easier approach to Galileo's nativity for astronomers. All right, this comes from a really brilliant software that you can find online. It's free for both Mac and PC. And thanks to these cats, I learned so much from Stellarium software. I should have that written here. It's STELLARIUM.org. Will bring you to a place where you can download Stellarium. So if you're an astrologer, I really highly recommend you cast your chart, not only like this, but also like this, and start to relate the astrology chart to that which it is modeling, which is the living sky, right? And of course, the astronomy software is also a model, but a lot comes alive, and a lot of the, I think, information that is left out of the model of a chart wheel shows up in this way. Okay, so you can just point your attention to the moon here. All right, this is Galileo's Taurus moon right at the midheaven, culminating, reaching its highest height for this day of Galileo's birth. Now, could we see it? Did it necessarily look like this? The sun was above the horizon, as you can see, and the software allows me to dim the light. Probably you could see this moon. It was far enough from the sun. It's a waxing crescent moon. And here it is in the sign of Taurus. But do you know your constellations? What's the problem here? I'll bring in some Stellarium art to help you see the case that I'm making. That Taurus moon is aligned to the constellation called Aries. And hereforth, I will call that constellation the Ram, because signs and constellations are very different things. And Galileo knew this, right? That Taurus moon aligned to the constellation of the Ram. Galileo's Pisces sun aligned to the constellation of the Water Bearer, right? Which many will call the constellation of Aquarius. Also, Pluto and Pisces, we don't even see that here in Stellarium because astronomers have kind of excused Pluto from the list of planets, now considered to be a dwarf planet, right? Mercury, kind of in a space in between the constellations of the Water Bearer and the Fish, and then Pisces Venus, who is actually aligned to the Fish constellation. But very importantly, we have this Taurus moon in the constellation of the Ram, and this Pisces sun in the constellation of the Water Bearer. So did Galileo get this whole thing wrong? So let's look at this and hear what NASA has to say about it. This is the full first page of this Constellations in the Calendar link. You can see the specific URL down below if you want to read the article in full at their space place, their education center for kids. And we'll cruise over here to the right of the page and zoom in, and I'll just read Leo Schmeo. All right. Hi, I'm a Leo. No, I'm the Leo. And we read, some people believe or make believe that the current sign of the zodiac affects how things go in their everyday lives, depending on the sign of their birth. This idea is called astrology, and people who claim to use the signs of the zodiac to make predictions are called astrologers. Okay, let me just chime in here. NASA is saying people make believe that the current sign of the zodiac, so what do they mean by that? Okay, I assume they mean, actually I know they mean that where the sun is in the zodiac now. So I'm recording this, for example, on April 16th, 2019, and the sun is in the tropical sign of Aries. All right, so they say the current sign of the zodiac, they would say, I guess, that the current sign of the zodiac right now, though the zodiac is actually always consists of 12 signs, I guess they're saying the current sun sign of the zodiac, which is now Aries, will affect how things go in our everyday lives depending on the sign of our birth. So, you know, the sign of my birth and this opinion of what astrology is would, in NASA's point of view, I guess, be Scorpio, because I was born October 24th, 1975, and the tropical sign of Scorpio hosted the sun at that time. Okay, so what is the relationship of Aries, right, the sign of the zodiac today, and Scorpio, the sign of the zodiac that I was born under? All right, so I'll just say that this is a sad basic misconception of what astrology is, but it's understandable because in many ways this is the astrology that is presented on the magazine stands and the newspapers today, right? So I'll go on and read here the second paragraph. Mimi's birthday is August 4th. We can assume, I think Mimi is the one saying, hi, I'm a Leo. When she says, I'm a Leo, she means that on her birthday, the imaginary line from Earth through the sun and out into space on the other side of the sun points to the constellation Leo. The trouble is, it doesn't. Read this article and find out why. So the article goes on to say, some curious symbols ring the outside of the star finder. You see a link there. That's that other page that I showed earlier that shows up when you search what is astrology at NASA Space Place. These symbols stand for some of the constellations in the zodiac. What is the zodiac and what is special about these constellations? Imagine a straight line drawn from Earth through the sun and out into space way beyond our solar system where the stars are. Then picture Earth following its orbit around the sun. The imaginary line would rotate, pointing to different stars throughout one complete trip around the sun, or 1 year, right? This, by the way, is called the secondary motion, Earth's orbital motion or yearly motion. The primary motion, the spin, day. The secondary motion, the orbit, the year. Here, my fist starring as the sun. Okay. All the stars that lie close to the imaginary flat disk swept out by this imaginary line are said to be in the zodiac. The constellations in the zodiac are simply the constellations that this imaginary straight line points to in its year-long journey. Okay, that's a pretty cool way to describe this, actually, with static imagery and language. I'm going to show this actually now in moving images. This is an animation that I created with the help of another wonderful astronomy software called Solar System Scope. Hide my camera in case that's keeping it from view. SolarSystemScope.com. And let me hit play, and we're just going to look at this secondary motion during the course of a year. I'm beginning, for some reason, on October 8th, 2017. I think that's the day that I created this animation. And we'll first just point out that I hope you can see the blue ring highlighted. Okay, first of all, this is not to scale in any way, right? But that blue plane, that blue ellipse, thank you, Kepler, is the plane of Earth's orbital path about the sun. Or I should say, the ellipse is Earth's orbital path about the sun. The plane that it defines is what we call the ecliptic, okay? Not elliptic like ellipse, ecliptic like eclipse, okay? And it's the plane of the year, Earth's orbit about the sun. So here we are in November, right? And we see moon about Earth in this model, and Earth about the sun, and all the planets about the sun. And I hope you can see some of the other planes here and see that none of them are parallel to the plane of Earth about sun, right? So Mercury, Venus, they have their own orbital periodicity. They also have their own orbital plane, okay? We extend this plane, the ecliptic, towards infinity, and we encounter the constellations of the zodiac. So from Earth's point of view, the sun is always held by one of these 12 star groups. There's the twins in July. Here's the crab, later July and August time. And I'm actually going to rewind this a little, and we'll watch that again. Because one thing I want you to notice is if you know the tropical signs and the dates associated with them, you will find that the sun is not between Earth and the constellation traditionally associated with the sign of the time. Like here's December 21st, that's the beginning of tropical Capricorn, but the sun's aligned to the archer of the sky. And now the goat in January, which we usually consider to be, at least in those dates, Aquarius time, okay? So we're relatively about one sign off from the constellations traditionally associated with the signs. We're gonna stop here at August 4th to prove NASA's next claim to be absolutely correct. The sun at this time is between Earth and the constellation of the crab. So we hear from NASA in the same Space Place article, when the Babylonians first invented the 12 signs of zodiac, a birthday between about July 23rd and August 22nd meant being born under the constellation Leo. Now, 3,000 years later, the sky has shifted because Earth's axis, the North Pole, doesn't point in quite the same direction. Now, Mimi's August 4th birthday would mean she was born under the sign of Cancer, one constellation earlier, not Leo. So first, a note about precession. Axial precession. Okay, the Earth spins on its axis, day. The Earth orbits as it spins in a year. And the spinning, the diurnal motion, the daily motion, primary motion, the orbital motion or yearly motion is the secondary motion. This precessional motion is often referred to the tertiary or third motion of Earth. It's often taught in astronomy class as the same motion of the wobble we see in a top as its spin starts to slow. The wobble will always be in the opposite direction to the spin itself. So Earth spins west to east. We also orbit the sun west to east. But this tertiary or third motion precession of the equinoxes is east to west. And basically, it's this type of motion of the Earth's axis. And you better see it here in the animation than me wiggling this globe around in a small camera in the corner of your screen, right? And so north on Earth will always be north. Like wherever your location is on north, and I'm not talking about magnetic north, that changes. I'm talking about true north. Okay, so if you live on a road that points into the North Star, for example, Polaris, all right, that road will always point north. You could travel in that direction until you reach the North Pole. But because the axis is continuously through this precessional motion, shifting its direction of where it's pointing in space, while your road will always head true north, it's not always going to point to Polaris. Polaris, pole star. North Star is a pretty new name for this brightest star of the constellation Ursa Minor, because it has not always been our pole star, and it will not always be our pole star. Okay. So this is an incredible thing, and basically this is the motion that modern astronomers are using to suggest that tropical astrology is astronomically inaccurate. Well, we've known about this for thousands of years. Galileo knew about this. Kepler knew about this. Okay. But very importantly, the directions are shifting not on Earth, but in the relationship of Earth and the heavens. And so we continue to read. The constellations are different sizes and shapes. So the sun spends different lengths of time lined up with each one. The line from Earth through the sun points to Virgo for 45 days, but it points to Scorpius for only 7 days. To make a tidy match with their 12-month calendar, the Babylonians ignored the fact that the sun aligned actually moves through 13 constellations, not 12. Then they assigned each of those 12 constellations equal amounts of time. Besides the 12 familiar constellations of the zodiac, the sun is also aligned with Ophiuchus for about 18 days each year. All right, so we're going to get back to that. But first, let's just prove that NASA is making two very important claims here, and they are true. One, the tropical signs, right? So if you just look at what your sign is in the horoscope, dates, and the newspaper, the magazine stands, the tropical signs do not align to the constellations typically associated with them. Like NASA's example is at August 4th. I've got 2018 here, but it's the same for, basically the same for hundreds of years, regardless when Mimi was born on August 4th, whichever year that was, say it was 2012 perhaps. The sun in what we say is the tropical sign of Leo was not aligned to the constellation of the Lion. Now, NASA is also showing us their cards that they believe what astrologers believe is that the sign of Leo equals the constellation of Leo. And the truth is, I know many astrologers who do believe that. Why wouldn't you? But educated astrologers absolutely do not. The tropical signs do not align to the constellations they were traditionally associated with. Number two, NASA is telling us the constellations are of different size and different shapes. Okay? So like the Virgo constellation will host the sun's travel for 45 days. And if you divide a 360-degree circle equally into 12 slices, you get 30 degrees per sign. And the sun moves on average 1 degree per day. Okay, so each sign of the zodiac hosts the sun's travel for about 30 days, average. And yet NASA's pointing out this claim, and it's very accurate, that the Virgo constellation, which I prefer to call the priestess because constellations and signs are different things, will host the sun's travel for 45 days, not 30. And they say that Scorpius only hosts the sun for 7 days. That one I find a little bit suspect, but very importantly, their claim that constellations are different sizes and shapes. They do not all take 30 degrees of arc length equally, right, is very real. And therefore, you can never have an equal division of the ecliptic circle of 360 degrees into 12 slices of 30 degrees, map the constellations perfectly. Never. Right? These are important and very real claims. Check out the dates down there in association to the constellations. Like here's that priestess constellation called the Virgin in solar scope. Here's Balance, Scales. Here's the Scorpion with the serpent holder who's Ophiuchus above. And you'll see, and you can review in this recording of this video, that motion of Earth about the sun. And just check the dates. If you know the tropical astrology dates, you will see that they in no way correspond to the constellations that the signs are traditionally associated with. NASA is very right about this. Now, these are the dates that we can read here. This is from Cosmopolitan. Everything you need to know about the controversial 13th zodiac sign. Okay, so NASA did this article at spaceplace.com, mentioned that there's actually 13 signs of the zodiac, and the sun is in Ophiuchus for 18 days each year. And then folks went and did some math, and you can read in this article below the image here, astrologists who participate in Eastern astrology, which follows the zodiac based on constellations, not signs, according to Mother Nature Network, versus the aforementioned Western form, are the ones who believe everyone's signs have changed. Okay, we're going to unpack that a little bit later in this presentation, and not too deeply, but I'll say there's some pretty, well, I'm just going to leave that out. Anyway, on the right, we see this list of dates with now 13 signs. Ophiuchus introduced there towards the bottom between Scorpio and Sagittarius. And these are the dates that, from NASA's math, show the accurate alignments of the sun's passage through these 13 constellations of the zodiac. So I mentioned earlier that I was born on October 24th. I find that actually the sun was aligned to the constellation Virgo, which for aforementioned reasons I prefer to call the priestess. And that was true. That is true. And Mimi's August 4th birthday, we see August 4th does not live between the dates of August 10th and September 16th. I'll call that NASA's Leo, or I'll say constellational Leo, or the lion. But rather that August 4th date falls within the range here attributed to Cancer, or the crab. Very true, very accurate. You also see that these ranges between the dates are not the same. Some, like Virgo, as NASA mentioned in that article, 45 days, where Scorpius here shown November 23rd to November 29th, only 7, maybe 6. Why? All right. And I just want to reemphasize that we see what NASA believes astrology to be. Okay, first of all, they believe astrology to be superstitious nonsense and fantasy stories and all of that. Okay, so let me course correct and say what NASA believes, astrologers believe, is that the energies of, I'll say it in my words, the way that the heavenly energies participate with our own is completely determined by the constellation that the sun is aligned to. Okay, so it's sun sign astrology and it's constellational astrology. And because the signs of tropical astrology do not align to the constellation these signs are traditionally associated with, NASA is saying that astrology is bunk. So we're going to debunk that today by showing what the very real astronomy of the tropical zodiac is. And as I mentioned before, it is Earth astrology. It is not about those constellations. It is not about those stars. It is about Earth and one star that we call Sol, or the sun, which is not support of sun sign astrology alone, by the way. The moon Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn matter, and the stars matter too, but the zodiac itself is a result of Earth astrology, or the very real astronomical motions of Earth, like the primary motion, the spin, and the secondary motion, the orbit, day and year. Okay, so first of all, I just want to say a little thing about this, because this is the astronomy that the astronomy authorities, if you will, NASA, are teaching our kids. We read here, to make a tidy match with their 12-month calendar, the Babylonians ignored the fact that the sun actually moves through 13 constellations, not 12. Okay. But first of all, this idea of the Babylonian calendar is fuzzy and out of focus. The Babylonian calendar is a solely lunar calendar. It's based on the phases of the moon, right? What are the phases of the moon? From Earth's point of view, the relationship of moon and sun. From new moon to new moon, we call this a synodic month, where synod means meeting. Okay, so in this case, the meeting of moon and sun, new moon, right? Which, unless it's a solar eclipse and you're standing in the right place to be in the shadow, a new moon is like a no moon. We don't see the moon at all. So the Babylonian months began with that first visible crescent after sunset in the west, which poetically is often called Diana's bow. Diana, the goddess of the moon, shooting arrows back at her brother Apollo, the sun, who is now below, setting in the west, you see? Now, a lunation, or a synodic month, new moon to new moon, on average, is 29.53059 days. Let's call that 20 and a half for now. So if you want to keep new moon to new moon, right, as the definition of your month, what you do to keep 29 and a half days is you alternate months between 30 and 29 days, which you can see in the column, the right here, of the Babylonian calendar, of 12 months, but sometimes 13. Okay, because 12 months of 29.5 days, or 6 months of 29 days and 6 months of 30 days, right, is 354 days. That's not a year, right? A year is 365 days. Actually, 365 and a quarter days, right? Wrong. That's what the Julian calendar did. The Gregorian correction was to bring us to a truer number for the number of days in a year in fraction of days, which is 365.242199 and change. And it's very tricky to get 365.242199 a year, Earth, Sun, to be a common multiple with 29.53059, the lunation, Earth, Moon, Sun. And the ancient calendar creators had beautiful ways of tackling this problem. So I can't get into all of that right now. But very importantly, if you're keeping a lunar year based upon the phases of the moon, the synodic cycle of the moon, okay, you get 12 months, 29.5 days, which total 354 days, which is 11 days and a bit short of a tropical year, right? So if you have 3 of these years, you're now about 33 or 34 days short of a tropical year. And so then you add a leap month, okay, to bring you close to starting a new moon, new year on a, let's say a solstice or an equinox, something that is part of the tropical year, the Earth's sun. It's a really tricky thing to do. But very importantly, if you were defining these 12 constellations by where the new moons, or better said, it's hard to see a new moon because the sun is there and you can't see constellations through the sun, right? Let's say we were doing this with full moon. How can you do this? How do you know it's full moon? Well, she looks full. Also, because the full moon is opposite the sun from Earth's point of view, a full moon rises at sunset and sets at sunrise. And it's much more easy, of course, to see the stars that are holding or hosting the moon in her travel than it is the sun, because the sun is so bright, right? So if you're defining these 12 slices of the sky, as NASA describes it, by the new moon to new moon, right, the lunations, well, it's not going to work out too well for you, because in 1 year, it shifts about 11 degrees, which is more than a third of one of these slices. In 3 years, it's gone back a full sign. And then you know to introduce another month, okay? So it's a very dynamic thing. It's a hard thing to do. It's a very powerful problem to address for astronomers and astrologers. And I mean, we had to find our way to the Gregorian correction, which actually brought a bunch of the dusty astrological texts off the shelves because the church couldn't figure out why Easter was slipping from the equinox, right? Which is supposed to define Easter, the first Sunday after the full moon after equinox time, and was starting to shift away because we were working with a year based on 365.25 days, where it's actually more like 365.242199. Those numbers are very close to one another, but over centuries, there's a great slippage that happens, and that was noticed, and it had to be corrected, and hence the Gregorian calendar, which is a solar calendar and in no way a lunar calendar. 30, 31, 28, sometimes 29 does not keep the phases of the moon. It's a very hard thing to do. But the Babylonian calendar, which now has become the Hebrew calendar, the Chinese lunar calendar, there's many wonderful ways that astronomers of old sorted this problem out. So I just want to say the way that NASA is presenting this thing is completely fuzzy. And I mean, I don't know what to call it, but bad astronomy. So we've known about this for a long time too. The relationship of the lunation, the months by phases, on average 29.53059 days, and the tropical year, right? Earth about sun of about 365.242199 days. Is an amazing relationship that we now call the Metonic cycle, after a Greek astronomer, Meton. Though this cycle was encoded into Stonehenge, and it was certainly known about by the Babylonians and by the Chinese. I mean, they were devising calendars based on this amazing synchronicity or coincidence. I use that word in the true way, which is cycles that are lining up, is that 19 solar years equals almost exactly 235 lunations, that period of new moon to new moon. So grab a calculator and multiply 29.53059 by 235, divide by 19, and you will see you get a number pretty close to 365.242199. All right. And the way this works in a calendar, if you want to do a calendar defined by lunations for your months, so switching back and forth between 30 days and 29 days to keep that 29.5, but it's actually 29.53059 on average, and it's these 19 years or 235 lunations where the cycles sync. And you end up with 12 years of 12 lunations and 7 years of 13 lunations to give this 19-year, 235 lunation cycle of synchronicity that's now called the Metonic cycle. And while that's probably too advanced to teach kids at NASA's space place, the point is what they are teaching, and they're saying that this is why the Babylonians said there's only 12 instead of 13, that they're saying that the 12 is a result of their lunisolar calendar of moons. They're teaching here, or they're actually not teaching at all, but it seems their understanding of the Babylonian lunisolar or solar-lunar calendar, it's like an approximation, it's fuzzy, it's really, frankly, bad astronomy. Now about this Ophiuchus character, who's an amazing constellation. If you live in the Northern Hemisphere and you know your stars, gigantic constellation. And I don't have an image here, but we have many old images of the amazing truth that the tail of the scorpion and the arrow of the archer point to the galactic center, and that Ophiuchus is standing on that place in space, okay? we'll see that here. I just want to reference that the two glyphs in astrology that have arrows, and those are Scorpio and Sagittarius, well, the two constellations, right, that those signs are traditionally associated with, the Scorpion and the Archer, point their arrows, the Scorpion's stinger and the Archer's arrow, to the galactic center. And Ophiuchus stands there. So this is an image from April 11th, 2019, 5:24 a.m., Sacramento, California. This is the day that I delivered this talk at Crocker Art Museum for Art Mix Cosmos. And we're going to look at an interesting alignment with Jupiter here, okay? First, let me just say that this golden curve that you see here in the sky in Stellarium software, that is the ecliptic plane, right? So the ecliptic plane, what is it? If my fist is the sun, you look at the little camera, it's the plane of Earth's orbit about the sun, right? But from our view, our feet on the ground on Earth, how we see the ecliptic is sun's passage through the constellations of the zodiac over the course of the year. Earth orbits sun, but from Earth's point of view, sun's, visibly orbiting the Earth, or at least moving through these 12 star groups, or wait, NASA says 13. And Jupiter on this date, April 11th, might agree, because let me bring in the Stellarium art here. And we will find Jupiter like in the leg of the serpent tender, Ophiuchus, okay? So from the right to the left, because that's the true secondary order, west to east, I'll just say that we see a bunch of the priestess here, including the bright star Spica. See if I can wiggle my mouse there and you'll see. And then the scales, and then the scorpion with Ophiuchus above, and then the archer, and then the goat or sea goat, right? The goat with the fish's tail. And those, notice, are constellations that are basically embracing this golden curve, this ecliptic plane, right? That's the plane of Earth, Sun, the plane of the year. Earth orbiting sun, secondary motion, or from Earth's point of view, sun about the Earth, okay? Now, these are the constellational boundaries that are employed in modern times, all right? They were defined by the International Astronomical Union at a convention in 1929 and officially accepted, I believe, in 1930. And these are the boundaries that NASA is utilizing to calculate such timings as these. So I rewind because I'm going to bring in these constellational lines, and you'll see, what they attribute to the sea goat, to the archer, the shield above them, the eagle in the upper left there, the dolphin, whatever. But let's bring our attention to this specific length of the ecliptic that is attributed by these constellational boundaries, which were not the boundaries that the Babylonians drew, and that's what NASA seems to be suggesting in this article, by the way, but rather as defined by the International Astronomical Union in 1929. We can see that these boundaries only offer this much of the ecliptic curve or line to the constellation Scorpius, okay? And it is that small fraction of the ecliptic plane that NASA suggests offers these 6 days for the sun's passage through the sign, as they consider signs to be constellations on the ecliptic, through the sign that they would call Scorpio. And so you see here Scorpio, November 23rd to November 29th, obviously a fraction of that list I showed before that showed up in Cosmo magazine, right? So I think one of the great mysteries here is why are astrologers somehow taking astrological advice from Cosmo just because it has a cosmic name possibly, but I don't think cosmology and in the modern sense in the cosmos are necessarily related, but I digress. Or why astrologers are taking astrological advice from NASA, who is not shy and basically vehemently addressing astrology as superstitious nonsense. All right, that to me is a great mystery. But anyway, if we listen to these so-called authorities of all things space, we find that Scorpio only gets 6 or 7 days of the sun's passage. Now, what's the issue with that? Let me direct your attention there, okay, to the 15th brightest star in our sky, and it's called Antares, and in ancient times known as a royal star, along with Aldebaran, which is opposite the eye of the bull, and about square to those stars, the heart of the lion, Regulus, and Fomulo, the eye of the southern fish, where the water bearer is pouring the stream. That those 4 stars, known as royal stars, or the markers of the heavens, were utilized in ancient times to define the signs. That history aside, and it's important, Antares, the heart of the scorpion, is the 15th brightest star in our sky. It is only 4.5 degrees, well, I can say with authority, less than 5 degrees of celestial latitude. What is that? Notice that these stars, I mean, even including Jupiter and Saturn, these moving stars or planets, but notice that the stars of the constellations of the zodiac, those that embrace the ecliptic plane, are not all on the ecliptic, right? In fact, none of them are exactly. On the right of the screen, you can see the shaft of wheat that the priestess in the sky holds. This is the star Spica, which is very important for astrological and astronomical truth that we will unpack a bit down the line here in this presentation, in which I'm glad I can take my pace through time and space. But Antares and Spica are both what are called southern latitude stars. Celestial latitude, simply a straight line distance from the ecliptic plane. Okay, so Antares is about 5 degrees, a little less than 5 degrees from the ecliptic. And that's pretty close. It is certainly a lot closer than any of these stars of Ophiuchus you see above, right? Which are much dimmer. Again, Antares, the 15th brightest star in the heavens, an amazing light show of a star. If you know that star, you know what I mean. And I can't even name any of these stars of Ophiuchus above, though I can name some of his stars. But one thing without a doubt is if I took you outside and said, okay, this line, it runs pretty close to that star, but pretty far from those, and this star is so amazingly bright, you would probably question why the International Astronomical Union in 1929, when defining these constellational boundaries, why in the heavens they would give that space of the ecliptic heavens to Ophiuchus and not to Scorpius, to the serpent tender and not to the scorpion. And I mean, I'm raising my voice, I guess, a little, because it feels to me like there was a seed planted at that time, perhaps with some foul play as the intention to debunk astrology down the line. It is being used in this way today by such claims as NASA's 13th sign thing. Where is Jupiter right now? Let me take the images away because this is fun to see. Basically making an eye of the cosmic serpent, which is an old name for the Milky Way, the serpent that surrounds us, or maybe the fish in other traditions, Leviathan. And you probably, maybe you can or can't see it, but there's a place where the Ouroboros, the serpent that bites its own tail, and it's right near the galactic center, and Jupiter's right about there on April 11th, 2019, making the eye of the cosmic serpent here, which, along with the radio telescope measured gravitational source that we know as Sagittarius A, the black hole at the center of the Milky Way galaxy, it's directed the stinger of the scorpion, the arrow of the archer, and then the foot of Ophiuchus are all directed to that sacred place of space. And Jupiter was visiting there on April 11th, 2019. Now, is Jupiter too far from the stinger of the Scorpion? Very bright stars. It's 2 stars, one of them Shaula, for that stinger to be considered an ecliptic star or a zodiacal constellation. If you know the sky, the answer is no. Those stars are so much brighter than anything Ophiuchus has to offer. But these 2 stars that are next to Jupiter here, they are visible. And certainly these 3 stars, like of the serpent that Ophiuchus is holding in the way that this art is drawn, they are visible. They're not nearly as visible as Antares or Shaula. And though Shaula has significant celestial latitude, like far from the ecliptic plane, it's not too far considering that stars of other zodiacal constellations are allowed to be offered ecliptic space even though they're further away. And most importantly, I can say that the truth that this ecliptic curve where Antares aligns was given to Ophiuchus, not the Scorpion, is bad astronomy. So, I mean, I would love to have the opportunity to address a member of the International Astronomical Union about that. But you can see with these boundaries, you know, thanks to Stellarium software, like they're basically ridiculous. Why give all of this space to Ophiuchus, which is clearly aligned to the Scorpion? And why do I need a 13th sign when I can see Jupiter very strongly aligned to the stinger of the Scorpion at this time? Is he closer to these dim stars that make up Ophiuchus's foot? Yes, he is. Yes, Jupiter is. I like to say he's and she's with planets. I'm kind of old school in that respect. Pardon me if that offends in any way. Jupiter is closer to those dim stars that make up Ophiuchus's foot, and I've seen them in the sky with my eyes. They're very visible. But Jupiter is very clearly also aligned to the stinger of the Scorpion. Why do I need this 13th sign? I need it if I believe that the zodiac is constellational and the stars most close to that line should be zodiac constellations. But this idea of the constellational zodiac and the suggested history of the constellational zodiac by NASA is off from the history of this sacred science called astrology. All right, so there's that little bit of Scorpius. I spent a lot of time there. It didn't mean to so well, but I just want to say very importantly this, you know, here's NASA showing us their cards, that this is what they believe astrologers like Mimi believe. When Mimi says, I'm a Leo, Mimi born on August 4th, she means that on her birthday, the imaginary line from Earth through the sun and out into space on the other side of the sun points to the constellation Leo. This is not in any way the belief of tropical astrology. Some tropical astrologers sadly believe this because they haven't been educated, and that's okay, right? But we learn this thing, signs and constellations don't align. Now there is sidereal astrology, sidereal meaning of the stars, where it is much more of a constellational thing. We heard in that Cosmo article above about Eastern astrologists. This is who they are referencing. Sidereal astrologers, and there's a Western tradition of sidereal astrology as well, of the stars astrology, which is not tropical astrology. Tropical astrology is about Earth astrology, as I intend to show you. But most sidereal zodiacs, at least actually all of them that I know of, also divide the 360-degree ecliptic circle into 12 equal slices of 30 degrees. And we've already seen, true to NASA's claim, that a 12 equal division of the circle cannot map the constellations, because the constellations of the zodiac are of different sizes and shapes. It's very true. Yeah. So I'm not saying that NASA's wrong about the claims they're making. The Ophiuchus thing, I think, to be very suspect. But as far as that the tropical signs do not align to the constellations they are traditionally associated with, true, and that they never can if there are equal divisions of the sky into 12 30-degree slices because the constellations don't do that, true. What they're missing is the foundational astronomy and the very real astronomy of the tropical zodiac. So this idea that we mean that the sun or the imaginary line from Earth through the sun to the stars on the other side is defining the sign of the time, wrong. And of course they would be wrong because I project. They're not with an open mind and heart investigating what astrology is. They're asking astrologers, how do we define our signs? They're starting from a place of let's prove that astrology is fake. Maybe that's a false claim. I don't think so. What do you think? I think that they're basing their truth on things like this. Some people make believe the current sign of the zodiac affects how things go in their everyday lives, depending on the sign of their birth. This is astrology, and astrology is superstitious nonsense. Leo Schmeo. And so NASA drops the dunce cap on our friend Mimi here. Okay. Well, she's just been corrupted by, pseudoscience and magazine and newspaper columns, at the checkout line. But NASA's actually pretty checked out. You're willing to call Mimi a dunce? I've got Mimi's back, but that's okay if you think she's ignorant. Are you willing to drop that dunce cap on Kepler? Let me take that away. You are literally telling me in this claim of what you believe, astrologers believe, that Kepler is an idiot, that Galileo is an idiot, or just blinded by archaic nonsense. Was Galileo blind? No. Galileo, famous for his time spent observing the sky, finding the moons of Jupiter, seeing with a telescope the craters of the moon, the phases of Venus, and other proofs that the old idea of cosmology was incorrect. And Galileo was a great hero of astronomy, wasn't he? And he was an astrologer. Kepler, a great hero of astronomy, wasn't he? Isn't he? And he's an astrologer. So if you want to drop this dunce cap on Mimi, understand that you are dropping a similar, though much larger cap perhaps on the head of Kepler and that of Galileo. Do you really think with the amount of time that Galileo spent observing the motions of Earth and sky, that he did not understand that this Taurus moon in the birth chart drawn by his own hand was aligned to the constellation of the Ram? Do you really think that Galileo, who spent this much time observing the motions of the earth and the sky, did not know that this sun, which he defined in the chart drawn by his own hand to be in the sign of Pisces, do you think he did not know that those degrees of the zodiac aligned to the constellation of the water bearer? Are you seriously willing to drop the dunce cap on Kepler and on Galileo astronomers? And so I say NASA and use their logo because I have their article to refer to. It's much more gentle, thankfully. It's for kids, but very disinformative and very ignorant and uneducated. I can not only courageously, but accurately say, for reasons that I hope I have shown and will continue to show as we explore the very real astronomy of the tropical zodiac, that will allow very real and amazingly intelligent astronomers like Kepler and Galileo Galilei to understand that, yes, a Taurus moon does not need to be aligned to the constellation of the bull. I mean, you might as well drop a dunce cap on Newton's head too, although maybe not NASA, because Newton is not proven to have been an astrologer, but maybe the Royal Society of Chemistry, because certainly Isaac Newton, I mean, like 1 million of the 10 million words that we have written in Newton's hand were devoted to alchemy. 2 million to the Bible. So Isaac the infidel, Isaac the alchemist, Isaac the last sorcerer. And the truth is, for a practicing knowledge of alchemy, which Newton certainly had, and he translated many ancient alchemical texts like this, a recipe to make the philosopher's stone. For an operating knowledge of alchemy, you need to know astrology. If you don't believe me, study some alchemy. And you can read in words written by Newton's own pen expressions like the sun's exaltation in Aries, okay? And you can read statements from all three of these great masters about spirit. Mathematics is the alphabet with which God has written the universe, says Galileo. All right, we flip this around, and we're going to bring these beings into the light now. And I will say that this incredible Art Deco representation of these three, it's actually 3 and 5. It also includes the great Copernicus and William Herschel mentioned before. This is a statue that greets you when you walk to the Observatory of Griffin in Los Angeles, California. And we're going to go in through those doors and we will see just a bit of this amazing mural. The more I learn about astronomy, and especially the more I learn about astrology, the more I can see in this incredible transmission painted on the ceiling of the Griffin Dome. One thing I'll direct your attention to is Atlas, who's holding the heavens up, right? And you'll see, I think, see if I can spin my mouse around, and you'll see his hand between Aries, the ram, and Libra, the scales. We're going to find another image of Atlas, this one at Rockefeller Plaza in New York, and perhaps this marriage of science and spirit, if you will. But let's turn around, where I can easily show you that one of the circles of this armillary contains the glyphs of the astrological signs. And NASA would probably show up and weld in a little Ophiuchus glyph somewhere between Scorpio and Sagittarius, but trust me when I say it's not there, and you will never see it, because why? 12 signs. And I think I'll show and listen to a little thing later on that expresses, I believe, creation creates in 12s. So very importantly, I'll direct your attention to this. I think I need to close my camera in case it hides this arrow that's pointing to the Aries glyph. And I want you to see how it is at the intersection of 2 of the great circles shown in Atlas's armillary. This is, again, Atlas at Rockefeller Plaza in New York. So a lot of the very real astronomy of the tropical zodiac is going to be seen as we marry the actual sky, or at least this model of the sky from the astronomy software Stellarium, to the astrological chart. This one pinched, but this is from the astrology software Astrogold. So here's Galileo's chart. Again, that 14.5 degrees Leo for the horoscope is for the rising sign, because that's one of the degrees of the zodiac that he suggested in the charts drawn by his own hand. The moon culminating at the midheaven up here. What does that mean, midheaven? So first things first, Earth is at the center of the chart wheel, at least of a geocentric chart wheel, of which most astrology charts are based on Earth-centered experience. Why? And we live on Earth. We are witnessing the heavenly happenings from Earth. Does this mean that astrologers are confined to an ancient Earth-centered cosmology and that we don't know the Earth orbits the sun, or that we believe in some flat Earth? No. But our witness with our feet on the ground of the heavens is from Earth. And it's actually the center of Earth that is the center of the chart wheel. This is the glyph that we use for Earth. And we poetically call it the cross of matter inside the circle of spirit. The circle of spirit would be the circumference of the chart wheel, and that is the ecliptic plane. So let me go back to Newton's nativity or birth chart from this view. And that golden curve, as I showed before, is that ecliptic plane. Notice that the sun is right on it. But this is not true for Mercury or Venus or for the moon or Mars or Saturn and Jupiter, who are conjunct over here, the crab, right? Because they all have their own planes of orbit, each of the planets, right? They're close to the ecliptic plane. One of the reasons why Pluto was demoted to dwarf planet status is that his plane gets very far from the ecliptic plane, especially in the tropical signs of Aries and Libra, and that's a tale for another time, specifically for the early 1980s. But anyway, the ecliptic plane is the plane of Earth and Sun. So this circle of a chart wheel, a modern image of the astrological chart, on the outer circumference is the ecliptic plane. It's Earth in the center and Sun at the circumference. Okay. Here's an image of the Earth glyph from a global point of view. So poetically called the spine of Gaia, Earth's rotational axis, the north-south pole, and perpendicular to that axis, what I call the circle of matter, because though this plane of Earth's rotation, its spin, its diurnal motion, its primary motion, its day, though this plane of the rotation and this axis of that rotation, right, bring us such hits as sunrise and sunset, it's really all about an Earth motion, isn't it? Right? And so Earth, matter, things we can touch. And so I say the circle of matter, though the accepted term is the celestial equator. It is simply Earth's equator projected out to the heavens. Okay. So we see that Earth glyph here. We see that cross here. This is actually not the entire Earth glyph, because the circle should not be Earth's circumference, but rather the ecliptic plane. Okay. The plane of Earth and Sun. So these are the directions that we typically see on a compass rose, north at the top and east at the right, yeah? In the Northern Hemisphere chart wheel, east, and this is true for almost all chart wheels, east is on the left, the eastern horizon. And we still see the same sequence, okay? Let's just talk like clockwise, if you will, from the north to the east to the south to the west. Just start at the bottom and move clockwise, which in the Northern Hemisphere we call sunwise. North to the east, to the south, to the west. It's the same order, you see. And I like to call the four angles, we say this word in astrology, the ascendant, the midheaven, the descendant, and the IC, the imum chili, the bottom of the heavens. Latin for bottom of the heavens, IC down there. I like to call these respectively from the ascendant, the rise, the reach, the rest, and the root, because that's what's happening in these directions. You end up with quadrants, right? So the simplest division of a circle is by its diameter. And the ground does this in astrology. And then we could also take a division vertically, and what's called the meridian line does this in astrology. We'll see what that is in a little bit. But just to say that those two vertical and horizontal divisions of the circle into hemispheres creates quadrature. Right? This is an ancient image. I keep saying this word ancient, thousands of year old image by the first people of the land where I live, now called the United States of America, right? That's often described as the medicine wheel, where there's a different color, a different energetic, a different spirit associated with the four cardinal directions. This would kind of be a better image of the medicine wheel because it's embracing the cardinal directions, east, south, and west, rather than beginning at each of them, which we see here. This applies a little bit more to astrological awareness of the quadrants, as we call them. So very importantly, I can see in a chart wheel, right, like all of the ecliptic, I can never see that outside, can I? Right? I mean, I can see basically none of it when the sun is up, as it was when Galileo was born. But very importantly, this hemisphere division is performed on feet on the earth view, right, by the ground. So I'll take this chart wheel and bring the ground in and just suggest that the 6 houses, which we call 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, are below the ground in astrology. We maybe could call that for this example, the below or the invisible or the inside, while the above or the visible or the outside or the without is shown in the houses that we call 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, or first and second quadrants below ground and third and fourth quadrants above. So the thing that I really want to point out here is that the vertical line, I'm going to draw a line vertically up from the medicine wheel. Notice that it's shifted from the midheaven, or that vertical line near the moon. I think you know the moon glyph here. Why is that? And so we're going to look at Galileo's chart, and we're going to orient ourselves to the ascendant, which is where the ecliptic intersects the eastern horizon. Notice that it's not due east. Many astrologers I know do not know this, or did not until we wrapped, right? And I did not know this at first, and the sky taught me this. The ascendant is due east twice a day when either equinox point rise. The other one's setting in those times. Okay, so here's the ascendant where the ecliptic intersects the eastern horizon, where everything rises, new beginnings. And so, of course, we say the horoscopus, or the hour marker, is there because a birth is something new, like the east, you see. And in fact, why does the eastern sky rise? And the answer is because the earth is falling in that direction. So if you'll allow a spiritual sentence, I will say, just as the being descends into matter to lift spirit up, earth falls towards the east so the heavens may rise. That type of phrase might invoke criticism from, scientists who are more about the what of the sky, astronomy, than the why of the sky, astrology. Actually, the why of the sky would be correspondences. Astronomy and correspondences, and astrology is the bridge between the two. I digress. The descendant is where the ecliptic intersects the western horizon, where everything sets. And in between the two, we find the midheaven, or the medium cele, the middle of the heavens. But you might notice here, as we orient ourselves to the azimuth of the ascendant and the descendant, that MC is not between the ascendant and the descendant. You see that, right? And do you see also that that middle of the heavens, the MC, is not the highest point of the ecliptic curve? This is one thing that I've seen most inaccurately taught by astrologers over time, is that the midheaven equals the zenith, which is directly above your head. This is only true in tropical locations and only twice a day for a moment. In fact, typically the midheaven is not even the part of the ecliptic curve that is closest to the top of the sky. That is this point here, marked by the star, and it's called traditionally the nonagesimal, which simply means 90 degrees from the ascendant to the descendant from the horizon in either direction. But some also refer to it as the zenith, even though it's not the point of the sky directly above your head, which is, officially the zenith. It is the part of the curve, or that wheel on the chart, that is closest to the top of the sky. All right. And it's a different point than the midheaven. So very importantly, the nonagesimal is the highest point in space, but astrology, like astronomy, is a study of space and time, right? Astronomy is this too. When we talk about the cycles, this is certainly a time thing, isn't it? Right? The midheaven is the highest point in a sense in time. It is the culminating degree. So for example, at this time offered for Galileo's birth, the moon is culminating. How can I tell? Because it's there at the meridian. What is the meridian? The meridian is a north-south line, or like a line of longitude on the earth, okay? And in that sense, it is a local perspective of what I like to call Gaia's spine, or spin axis. In the northern hemisphere, north of the Tropic of Cancer, like Pisa, Italy, the midheaven is always due south. So it's where the ecliptic intersects the meridian line above ground in the south. And it is the middle place in time. So like at this time, Galileo, the moon was culminating. It's reaching its highest height, and then it will begin to descend towards its set in the west. It's at the reach, and it's on the way to the rest. And the moon at this time, the moon at the midheaven, is the moon halfway between the time in which the moon rose and the time in which the moon will set. Okay, so we have this kind of highest point in space, that would be the nonagesimal, and this highest point in time, that would be the midheaven. All right, we're getting kind of technical. Why all this? I'm going to bring the two visible colors of the medicine wheel. Why only two? Because the other two are below ground, you see, right? So the black starts at the set in the west, because when the sun sets in the west, darkness comes. And then this kind of neutral color of the white at the middle of the night, when the sun is at the IC, halfway between sunset and sunrise, okay, that's when the sun begins its climb. And in a sense, the middle of the night is akin to winter solstice if we compare the day and the year, the primary and the secondary. Okay, so here we see the yellow for the rising, here really reaching, and then the red for from that reach point to the rest in the west, okay? But the issue is that the medicine wheel is about the cardinal directions. And the ascendant and descendant are very rarely due east and due west. 2 moments every day, everywhere. So the medicine wheel actually is not really mapping the ecliptic plane. It's mapping another plane, which is very important for us to embrace to find the very real astronomy of the tropical zodiac. It is this plane. And you can see that it's moving through the east and the west and the south. It would move below the ground through the north if we turned around. And this is the celestial equator, okay? So the ecliptic plane, I am fond of calling the circle of spirit, sun, where the celestial equator I am fond of calling the circle of matter. Why does that matter? For some, that language will be a complete turnoff. For some of you, it'll keep you engaged. Why does that matter? Because this plane that I call matter, the celestial equator, here's another view, Earth's equator projected out towards the heavens, is really all about Earth. It's the plane of Earth's spin, right? It's the plane of this, day and night. And again, here's my principal challenge for those who deny the thesis, what I claim to be the principal thesis of astrology, which is that astronomical cycles participate with we earthlings energetically. How do you feel in the middle of the night versus the middle of the day? And if you say the same, I say you're not telling the truth, okay? This is an astronomical cycle. The Earth spins on its axis. It brings us such hits as sunrise and sunset, or the middle of the day and the middle of the night, really hot or really cold. There are different vibes. The flowers open and they close, you know. This is an astronomical cycle that no doubt participates with our energetic experience on Earth, you know, including biological hormones and much more. All right. What about the year? What is the reason for the seasons? And what is the plane of the year? Here it is. So plane of day, celestial equator, plane of the spin, and the plane of the orbit from Earth's point of view, right, would be sun about Earth. We know that's not true, but with our feet on the ground, this is the only way we can see it in our sky until we send the satellites out and such. Well, actually, we have to get further than satellites, don't we? And probes and whatnot. Anyway, we can expand and open our mind through what we are experiencing on Earth to imagine what's out there and looking back, right, from the sky. And this is the great portal that is opened as we engage as astronomers. The plane of the year is that ecliptic plane, right? Earth's orbit about the sun. And we see that the plane of the day, the celestial equator, which I call here the circle of matter, this plane of the spin, the primary motion, and the plane of the year, the ecliptic plane, which I call here the circle of spirit, the plane of the orbit, are not parallel to one another. They cross in two places. Why are they not parallel to one another? Well, this is why. The plane of Earth's spin right? Circle of matter, celestial equator, is tilted in respect to the plane of Earth's orbit by about 23.5 degrees. Now, very importantly, Earth's axis, all right, is always north-south. Literally, the spin axis of Earth defines the cardinal directions, not magnetic north-south, right? That changes over time. The magnetic poles move. True north, true south are defined, as I like to say, by Gaia's spine, by Earth's axis of rotation. It is the primary motion, the daily motion, the spin that defines north and south. And Earth's northern axis is always leaning north. Where I sit is that way, okay? So if this is the sun as Earth orbits, it's not keeping that axis towards the sun or something. The axis stays facing north. This is the reason for the seasons. We'll unpack this through this animation as we move along. But this is very important. North and south defined by Earth's axis of rotation. And so at this time that we call March equinox, all right, which is spring equinox in the northern hemisphere, an autumnal equinox in the southern hemisphere, the sun is due east of the center of Earth. Is the sun east ever in California, where I currently sit, in India at the same time? No. When the sun is rising in the east here in California, it is setting in the west in India. So from surface point of view, just like the cultures of California and India are very different, surface is different, particular. And we see that in astrology by the houses, where we see in the signs the whole, and that's like the below, the center of the Earth, right? The Earth is the center of the chart wheel. Actually, it's the center of Earth is the center of the chart wheel. That's a place where we're all connected. Friends in India right now could draw a line down through their spine, and they will meet mine in the very center of the Earth, which we all share. And because north and south are defined for the center of Earth by this spin axis, which runs from the center of the Earth through the terrestrial north and terrestrial south poles to the celestial and north and celestial south poles, because that axis defines the directions north and south, it also defines for the center of the Earth east and west. And hopefully you can see it in this image that at this point of Earth's secondary motion, the yearly motion, the orbital motion, the March equinox sun is due east of the center of Earth. So there's that line, right? Drawn from Earth through the sun to the stars on the other side. All right. And March equinox in tropical astrology, this is the beginning of 0 degrees tropical Aries, though it's not aligned to the constellation of the Ram. This is the beginning, in many senses, of the tropical zodiac itself. Why? East. Sit outside and watch the eastern sky at night. That is the place of the rise. I don't care where you are. And rising is new beginnings. So we begin the astrological year not on January 1st, but at March equinox. And in the northern hemisphere, people will say, because this is when light overcomes night, this is when days are growing longer than night. That's not true. It's actually conversely, it's converse from the truth of the southern hemisphere, isn't it? This is the astronomical truth of why we begin the tropical zodiac then. Because the sun is due east of Earth's center. The sun is due east for all of us as a globe, as a whole, as a planetary collective. And east is the place of new beginnings. East is the place of the rise. And that east point is one of the 2 equinox points, which astronomically is defined by the intersection of the ecliptic plane, the plane of the year, and the equatorial plane, the plane of the day. Secondary and primary. If you're following all this, you've been listening. If you're not quite, this video will be posted and you can rewind and review. The point where the ecliptic crosses the equator, gaining in northern declination, or really where the ecliptic finds northern declination from southern declination, and I know that's technical, but that place is the Aries equinox point. And this is where celestial longitude, which astronomers know from 0 to 360 degrees, begins. Astrologers know the celestial longitude in the way that astronomers knew not long ago, not long at all, is at that place where the ecliptic crosses the equator moving north is the 0 degrees Aries longitude. And 30 degrees later, we find the beginning of 0 Taurus, even though this is not about the constellations. I think you can see where that arrow is currently pointing is aligned not to the constellation of the Ram, so Galileo's birth again, right, which is up by the moon there at the midheaven, but rather it's aligned to one of the heads of the fish. And of course, you know I say fish and not Pisces, as I was first trained to by my first teacher, Daniel Gemario of the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School, because signs and constellations are different things. And we know this. NASA, it seems, does not know that we know this, or seems does not want to know this. So this was like literally the language in astronomy long ago. If you were, not long ago, if you were to describe the location of a star, you would speak in terms of longitude, right? Like 24 Aries, and latitude, 4 degrees north of the ecliptic plane. Let's talk about Antares. 10 degrees Scorpio, 5 degrees south. Okay. So what I'm saying is that this is the east point. Is it east here at the time of Galileo's birth? No. It's west of south, right? Southwest. But it is always due east in every moment's time. Throughout the great year, in the ages of, I'll leave that there, right? Throughout precession, the 0 tropical Aries point, where we begin the tropical zodiac, is always due east of the center of Earth. Now, on a surface location, you're spinning, right? So is Earth north-south, like meridian, where it's leaning, always your local north-south? No, there's one today. Just as the center of Earth's east is your east once a day. And when it is, every day, when it is 0 degrees tropical Aries rises, because that point that I'm showing here with this arrow in this slide is due east of the center of Earth. And we begin our tropical zodiac there, and our astrological year there, when the sun is there, March equinox, because east is the place of the rise. So let's take a look at that glyph a bit. And we're going to look at the eastern sky with our feet on the ground from an equatorial location. All right, so like Quito, Ecuador, for example, is where I created this next animation from using Stellarium software. And what I want you to notice is that the way the eastern sky works is like the horns of a ram and like this Aries glyph. We'll watch that a few times together. Just notice that stars that rise south of east head to the south, and stars that rise north of east head to the north. And stars that rise due east go straight overhead. Okay, this is from the equator. Let's watch that one more time together. And I will say, like the horns of a ram, they curl back around. Okay, so stars that rise south of east are going to rise south of east, culminate in the south, and then set south of west too. One more time. And just see with your own eyes in this animation at least, and I encourage you to go to the equator and spend some time staring east, or wherever you are, stare east, and I'll show you an adaptation will help you see the truth that the Aries glyph describes the motion of the heavens in the east. What is a logical response to this truth? From an astrological perspective, if I am saying that astrology is the science, and yeah, I'll call it a science, that marries the what of the sky the quantity of the sky, the measurable sky. Astronomy with the why of the sky, or the quality of the sky, the energetic experience of the sky, in ways the immeasurable sky, quality of the sky. Correspondences. Astrology is the attempt to measure the immeasurable through a deep study and a sacred study and sacred awareness of the measurable. Okay? So as an astronomer, a sacred astronomer, call it an astrologer if you will, if I'm watching the eastern sky and I see that it goes like this, like the horns of a ram, is it a jump for me to say that the east works like a ram? Or maybe in my language at that time, I would say the east works like Aries. Interesting. Does this constellation, the powerful, amazing stars, Sheraton, Hamal, the Alpha star of Aries, does it in any way look like this? Does it in any way look like this? Does it in any way, this group of stars, look like a ram to you? I mean, maybe like a chauffeur, like the ram's horn that was blown at the time of that first visible new moon, that Diana's bow of the crescent. Maybe. It certainly doesn't look like that. So where does this glyph come from? Shall we watch it one more time? It comes from the eastern sky. Astrology is the poetic breath of nature. And every moment there is like this fountain of youth in the east, because the east is the place of what's new, the place of the rise, you see? Do you see that here? Maybe half of it. Aries constellation, Aries sign. And it is Aries sign, tropical Aries sign, that works with those dates that you'll usually see listed to describe you as an Aries. And they are not true, and NASA is very right about this, and sidereal astrologers are very right about this. They are not true for sun hosted by the constellation, the star group we call Aries, which I, as you know, prefer to call the ram, because signs and constellations are a different thing. The Aries glyph describes the motion of the heavens in the east. And I believe that this is why the ancients took these stars that look nothing like this and nothing like a ram, and called it a ram and called it Aries, because the sky in the east works like this. And at that time, these stars were rising in the east. At that time, these stars hosted that intersection of the planes of day, equator, and the plane of year, ecliptic. At that time. And we'll see that shortly. So as sun is orbited by the Earth, right? From March equinox to June solstice, that line, right, through the sun from Earth will point not to the constellations, but to the signs of Aries, Taurus, and Gemini, the signs of spring. Okay, and notice now at June solstice, shown on the left, we see the shadow, more light in the northern hemisphere, less light in the southern hemisphere. In fact, no light below the Antarctic Circle or south of the Antarctic Circle, and always light north of the Arctic Circle, right? And this is northern hemisphere summer solstice and southern hemisphere winter solstice. And very importantly, the axis of Earth is leaning towards the sun. The axis of Earth is always, always, always leaning north, right? But that space of the heavens in this moment's time, which happens every year around June 21st, it hosts the sun. And in astrology, we call that 0 degrees Cancer, due north of the center of Earth. As Earth continues in the secondary motion from June solstice to September equinox, the sun will be found not in the constellations. Constellations and signs are different things, but in the signs of Cancer, Leo, and Virgo. Northern declination signs, which are decreasing in northern declination until the declination of the sun in this case, and the declination of the cusp of zero Libra always is zero, because declination is measured from the celestial equator, and only when the sun is at an equinox point does it align to the intersections of day and year. This is the very real astronomy of the tropical zodiac, and I hope you will start to see that it is like the medicine wheel, an honoring of the cardinal directions, which themselves are defined by the spin of Earth day and described yearly by the changing of the seasons. And the reason for the seasons is the sun shifting from Earth's perspective through the cardinal directions. And these quadratures, there's Libra, Scorpio, and Sagittarius signs, as Earth moves from March or September equinox to December solstice, winter solstice in the northern hemisphere, summer solstice in the southern hemisphere. And always, 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 in every moment of all time, the southern axis of Earth is leaning towards the degree that we call in tropical astrology 0 Capricorn. Cardinal signs: Aries, Cancer, Libra, Capricorn. Why do we call them cardinal signs? Because they align to the cardinal directions. The very real astronomy of the tropical zodiac is a directional system. And so we have signs that are north going north, signs that are north going back to the south until 0 declination, signs that are south going south to the extreme at December solstice, and signs that are south coming back. So I say December solstice, but we saw June solstice lit up, which is weird. But remember, the signs here are shown from an Earth looking through the sun perspective, or just really a perspective in space as to where Earth's axis is leaning. Now you stand up and lean forward, right? Does your chest feel a little different than your back? Because you're falling towards, right now, so Earth isn't standing on something and falling over, but it is orbiting without changing its directional orientation, right? It is, in the modern astronomy point of view or physics point of view, it is being pulled towards the sun, towards the center of this orbit. And so notice that those forces that pull are going to be different in the course of the year. Like at one point, and this is June solstice. Try to map this like I see it on the graphic here. That's backwards, I guess. It's hard to do. At one point, this is June solstice. Sorry, working with a video is like a mirror, The sun is pulling the Earth in the direction of its northern lean, isn't it? Well, the pole is square at this time, and the pole is towards the southern lean at the December solstice time. I didn't do the best job of showing on the video. It's a tricky thing to do, but hopefully you can see that in the animation. I just do it. Like, look at June solstice. The northern axis of Earth is leaning into the sun. Do you think that's a different experience for the northern side of Earth than it is at December solstice when the sun is pulling the Earth in its orbital motion south, or at least towards its southern lean? You better believe it. Do you think that there is energetic response to that very real astronomy? Is this astrology? Correspondences? I believe so. And we see these quadratures, north going north, north going south, south going south, south going north, these 4 quadrants as expressed by the year, also expressed in the day, the rise, the reach, the rest, and the root, the relationship of the secondary year and primary day, of the orbit year and spin day, of the ecliptic plane year and the equatorial plane day. So of course their intersection matters. Now I hope I've shown you that these equinox points, where these 2 planes, the planes of day and year, intersect, are very important and very real astronomical things. and that the points where they most diverge, also very real and astronomical things. There's your quadrature, equinox and solstice. Undeniable, very real astronomy. Yeah. So we can at least, I hope, agree on 4 principal stations of the year as we do and celebrate, and astronomy teaches, right? What shifted with astronomy, and really rather in recent times, is they no longer considered the sun to be 0 degrees Cancer when it is due north of the Earth's center. They might consider that to be 90 degrees celestial longitude, and they do. They used to call it 0 Cancer, and nowadays, instead of describing a star or planet's position by latitude and longitude, which is based on the ecliptic plane, which I call spirit, usually you'll hear astronomers describe the location of something in the sky by right ascension and declination, which is called the equatorial plane, or what I call circle of matter. So would it surprise us that astronomers who have now, and maybe forced by the burning times, gone like pretty materialistic, right? I don't mean that as a superficial way, but based really in matter, the what is it versus the why is it. Is it a shock that they would measure from the plane that I consider to be the plane of matter instead of the plane of spirit? So this quadrature is part of the day. Quadrature is part of the year. What I'm showing here is called the natural zodiac. 0 degrees Aries, we put at the hour marker, like for the whole globe. Why? Because 0 degrees Aries, that intersection of the planes of year and day, ecliptic and equator, is due east of the center of Earth. And so it is like the horoscopus, or the rising degree, for all of us. So, this I hope you can see is very absolutely real astronomy of the tropical zodiac. I mean, and the fact that NASA needs to teach why astrology is fake and debunk our craft and teach the kids that it's a bunch of fantasy stories and such, they're missing the opportunity, which they do, we should say, utilize in different ways, just with no astrological context or words like Aries, Cancer, Libra, Capricorn involved. They are missing the opportunity to embrace the very real astronomy of the tropical zodiac, which is based on equinox, solstice, equinox, solstice, and more importantly, as I hope you're seeing me share here, east, north, west, south, from the perspective of the whole globe, of Earth's center. So now, how do we jump from these 4 places to 12? Why are there 12 signs? And most will teach because there's 12 constellations. Why are there 12 constellations? Well, because there's 12 months. Well, the tricky thing is, if you're honoring months as new moon to new moon, we see that there's not 12, and this is a very difficult issue, as I expressed before, that brings us the genius of the Babylonian come Hebrew calendar and the Chinese lunar solar calendar. It's 12.369 new moons to new moons a year, if you start at a new moon, that is. Right? Or 13.37 moons a year if you're just looking at moon from a cardinal direction, or moon through the signs of the tropical zodiac, or moon through the constellations of the zodiac. So there's not equally 12. So why 12 signs? So I just want to play a thing for you. I believe that's up. Yes, it is. So you can hear this with your ears and see it also. Okay. So other strange technical issues here. I'm going to, before I share the screen again, try to get back to an image. Oops. Great. And can I do that? Sorry for the tech-ish here. Friends, I'm all alone. All right, here we go. One thing I wanted to say is just gratitude to the most beautiful Anna Zaharia, who together with myself creates these most beautiful images like this one, our collective known as Arts of the Chart. And very importantly, I mean, you can see if you know these words, polarity, triplicity, quadruplicity, these are words of the ancient craft. You can hear whole tone scales, chromatic scales. I could play augmented chords and diminished seventh chords for you, and to honor those same things from number and time. But importantly, I'll just say that these are very quantifiable, measurable ways, both in music, the tones of the chromatic scale, 12 half steps within an octave, equally spaced, and geometrically, right, which is 6 circles around the one to create what we call the seed of life pattern 7 that actually births a flower of 6 petals inside the original circle shown here in silver, and a flower of 6 petals outside the original circle shown here in gold. Those are the 6 signs of the chalice inside and 6 signs of the blade outside. And I could go on and on there, but for the science mind that might be witnessing this video, I'll just say that these are very rational, measurable, mathematical expressions through geometry and harmony of the essential nature of 12ness. And it is my opinion, though yes, the moon and sun dance from Earth's point of view in a choreography that has a general 12ness to it, but it's not exactly 12. This is exactly 12. And I believe this is why there are 12 signs of the zodiac. In fact, I believe this is what creates the zodiac. And I also believe that every planet has its own zodiac. So here's Saturn's. I believe that Saturn just happens to be made of the right stuff to show us hers. Okay? That we see this regular hexagon centered around Saturn's north pole. I believe every planet has its own tropical zodiac that has nothing to do with the stars out there, though they can help us see where the 12 equally spaced half notes or signs of the octave or ecliptic are, that the tropical zodiac for Earth and for every planet are based upon the very real astronomy of spin, day, in its relationship to orbit, year, primary and secondary, ecliptic and equator. It's different for every planet. And I suggest that every planet has its own tropical zodiac here in our solar system and beyond as well. And probably the sun has its own zodiac too. But that's a tale for another time. All right, feet on the ground. How do we notice this changing of the seasons? Right? One way is just to see, as I'm showing here, and I'll rewind the tape, sunrise every day of the year. This is shown from Seattle. The sun rises at its northern extreme everywhere on the Earth at June solstice time. Comes back to rise due east, equinox, and then rises at its southern extreme at December solstice time. We also notice the sun climbing the midday sun during the course of the year and then descending, right? For half of the year in the northern hemisphere, from December solstice to June solstice, it's on the climb. And from June solstice, it begins to descend. So we get a lower midday sun every year. This is the seasons, right? This is the reason for the seasons. And very importantly, it is a system of the cardinal directions, these 12 signs, which are themselves defined by these 4 points, cardinal signs of Earth astronomy. I hope I've done a good enough job to very clearly show that today. This is the very real astronomy of the tropical zodiac. Right? So if you want to put me on a panel with the astronomers who are debunking astrologer, we will first, if they will choose to have an open mind and heart and listen, we will first agree upon this before we get into some more of the mystical statements like the one we started with from Kepler, okay? So there are many ways where we see the changing of declination of the signs, or the sun through the signs during the course of the year is a great way we experience this, just where it rises on the eastern horizon, sets on the western horizon, its midday height, the altitude of the sun's culmination, if I speak astronomically. And it's a very directional thing, right? So we're going to look at the directional zodiac now in a different perspective. And so what I've done here is I'm showing the geocentric, which is the chart on the left, and I've trimmed it down to just Moon, Sun, Mercury, Venus, and Mars to make it a bit easier to see. On the right, beginning at the same time, and we're going to move through time. This is an animation I created utilizing the great softwares of Astro Gold, astrology software, and solar system scope, astronomy software, which on the right provides us with the heliocentric or sun-centered model, not to scale, but model of the solar system, and the dance of the secondary motions, the orbital motions, not just for Earth, but all of the planets. But what we will do, and I use ScreenFlow, I might as well mention as well, the editing software, and spent a few days of my life to align the directional zodiac, as I am fond of calling the tropical zodiac, correctly, so that due north is the cusp of Gemini and Cancer, tropical Gemini and Cancer, right? And so that's down, just as it is on the natural chart wheel, okay? So Earth's northern axis in the image on the right, the heliocentric image, is leaning down towards you. It's not facing exactly towards you, it's leaning down towards that Gemini Cancer cusp, okay? 23.5 degrees down towards that cusp. The southern axis is pointed or leaning up the cusp of Sagittarius and Capricorn. Due east of Earth's center is the cusp of Pisces and Aries, tropically speaking, and that's where we find the sun at this time. No surprise, because this was March equinox 2018. How can I tell? I look to the chart on the left and I see the sun at 0 degrees Aries. And it's a ½ degree Aries, right? About there. And so I'm going to move this through the time, and you can watch on the chart on the left, you can watch in the heliocentric image on the right, the power of the directional zodiac, which I don't believe is coming to the Earth from the heavens. I believe it's emerging from the center of the Earth outward infinitely. So let's first see the sun moving through the signs, the center of the sun moving from the green slice called Taurus to the yellow slice called Gemini, and you can see it on the chart on the left. Check out the moon, very quickly dancing around the Earth on the heliocentric in the right, now yellow, now blue, now red, now green on the left, now Aquarius, now Pisces, now Aries, now green, now yellow, now blue, right? Mapping the elements, as we call them, to these colors. Mars is retrograde because Earth is passing Mars, and you will see Mars now move from Aquarius in the yellow to Capricorn in the green. You can see that in the chart on the left, and you can see it in the heliocentric or sun-centered view on the right. Okay, Venus is about to pass Earth here. She's in the sign of Scorpio, the blue, and as Venus passes Earth, there's an apparent retrograde motion of Venus through our zodiac, both constellationally and by signs. And here's the signs, the directional zodiac, so you will see Venus move backwards from Scorpio into Libra there, okay, which is this amazing optical illusion provided by the truth that Venus and Earth are both orbiting the sun. Venus back into Scorpio here. Okay, so we could go on and on with this. In fact, I mapped 2 years worth. And I'll let you go back and see it later. Like I just watched, Mars move from Pisces to Aries, since I called our attention there. Watch Mars move at the bottom left of the heliocentric from the red Aries to the Taurus green. And you see that on the chart too. All right. So this is a proof that the directional zodiac is true. Here are other proofs with your feet on the ground. And this will be a lot to look at. These are 4 different experiences of the seasons. So one in the kind of horizontal at the top, this is a much slower view of the sun rising on the eastern horizon at different azimuths, we called it, throughout the year. Okay, this is how many of the ancients kept the calendars and used sacred observatories and sites like Stonehenge and Callanish and Newgrange to do so. At the bottom, the sun climbing in height and descending. On the bottom right, we see the chart and changing longitude and declination. That's kind of for the astrologers. At the right, we're coming on to equinox time, where the sun, which is always on the ecliptic, is also crossing the equator. And at that time, the two planes are aligned. And the sun shines overhead at the zenith for equatorial locations at equinox time. As we move towards June solstice, 0 degrees Cancer, the sun climbs up the earth as far as where it's shining, midday, and at 0 Cancer ingress, right? June solstice, and we're on our way there still. The sun is going to find its way to 23.5 degrees north declination, and it will shine as it enters 0 degrees tropical Cancer directly overhead for locations on the Tropic of Cancer. And guess what? At December solstice, the Capricorn sun is directly overhead for people living on the Tropic of Capricorn. Is it aligned to the constellation of Capricorn then? No. It's aligned to the Tropic of Capricorn. It's Earth astrology, friends. So if NASA tells me I need to change the name of December 21st beings from Capricorn to Sagittarius, because that's the constellation, the Archer, that the sun is aligned to on the imaginary line drawn through Earth at that time, why don't they tell me I also need to call the Tropic of Capricorn on Earth the Tropic of Sagittarius? Many of these keys are revealed by the glyphs. And I've never found yet where they came from or who created them. And I've asked great wise students of this craft. So again, Aries describing the motion of the east. And this is the equator view, okay? And again, we're looking now at 1111 BC, okay? Kind of Babylonian times, when that Aries constellation, which I prefer to call the Ram, was rising due east, and it's not today. But again, does it look like this? No, the sky does that in all times. In fact, I mean, if we bring our attention just a little bit to the right, I think we'll see that it's actually the constellation of the fish that looks like the Aries glyph. You see that? Not the ram. Well, that's interesting, because at the dawning of the age of Pisces, or the age of the fish, if you're willing to get mystical, and that happened at around when BC turned AD, so it's like, more politically correct, I guess, in science to say BCE, before Common Era, and CE, Common Era, than it is BC and AD, before Christ and after death, I was taught. No, right? AD means the year of our Lord. If you're going to use a Christian calendar to define time as you are, I mean, why not just say BC and AD, friends? Well, astrologically, I'd say BP, because it was at about that time, 1 AD, or that point where 1 BC became 1 AD, when the Aries tropical point, the March equinox point, shifted into the constellation of the fish. So I'll say BP, before Pisces, all right? And that means the fish was rising due east at that time. And there's that Aries glyph. Now, I showed that at Athens, Greece, which is at a latitude of 37 on Earth. So I had to tilt the glyph 37 degrees to the right to keep the motion of the 37 north sky. And it looks even more like the constellation we call Pisces, or the fish. Why are these fish tied together? The myths tell us it was Venus and her son Cupid escaping the attack of Typhon. I'll suggest they were tied together because at this time, they were rising in such a way that mirrored the motion of the eastern sky, the Aries glyph. But wherever you are in your location, say you're like 25 degrees north of the equator, you're going to have to tip it 25 degrees on the side. If you're north of the equator, you tip it towards the south. So this is for 37, like where I'm sitting in the Bay Area or Athens, Greece. Many other places. All right. What if we can take the ground away, as software allows us to do, and now look at this motion? What is that? It is the Pisces glyph. Ta-da! Which is one of only 2 astrological glyphs with a horizontal line referencing what? The horizon. Were ancients able to see through the ground? No, but we are with our mind's eye. The other glyph with a horizontal line, Libra, the scales. Is it about a constellation, or is it the sun setting into the western horizon? Cancer, Antisha. All right, we're not going to get too advanced and talk about what that is, but it's a very important thing. But we have seen the changing of the azimuth of the rising sun on the eastern horizon, right? It gets its northern extreme. Look, regardless of where you are on Earth, the sun will rise at its northern extreme at June solstice, all right? Directional zodiac. Now that means summer solstice for half of the world and winter solstice for the other half, right? But either way, regardless of where you are, rising at its northern extreme. Then heading back to the south, solstice. What does solstice mean? The stopping of the sun. The stopping of the sun, what? It moves 6 months north on the horizons, both east and west, rise and rest. And then 6 months towards the south, between the solstice, where it stops and turns around. You know what the Greek term for solstice is? Tropicos. What does that mean? Turn around. Tropicos, the Tropic of Cancer and Capricorn, where the sun shines directly overhead in its extremes during the course of the year, and Tropicos, the root of this tropical zodiac, which is a very real astronomical thing. Well, the sun moving back and forth, what does that look like? The sun going 6 months in one direction, stopping and turning around and going 6 months the other direction? How about the Cancer glyph? Does that look like the constellation of the crab? No. Does the constellation of the crab look like a crab? Not really. But the crab, like this motion, walks sideways. The crab, like this motion, lives at the seashore, which does like this, right? The tide comes in and out, friends. And we say Cancer rules what? The moon. What controls the tides? The moon and the sun and more. Anyway, Cancer. How about this one? The sun climbing for 6 months of the year and descending for the other 6 months of the year. Gemini, right? Where is it at its northern extreme, or its highest extreme for the northern hemisphere, its lowest extreme for the southern hemisphere? It is in where Gemini becomes Cancer. So Cancer maps the motion on the horizons, and Gemini maps the motion at the ascendant, or sorry, the midheaven. All right, Libra, sunset, especially at equinox time, Libra time, when at the equator the sun sets directly on a line due west. How's that? The Sagittarius glyph. Can you see the tilted pitch of the Earth's spin axis, day, in respect to the orbital axis, year? Earth astrology, the very real astronomy of the tropical zodiac. Capricorn. Okay, so let me go here. I'm just a little bit past it, right? The sun you can see down there, longitude 3 degrees 46 minutes, tropical Capricorn. So this is a few days after 0 Capricorn or December solstice. But stop, turn around, take some time, where the middle motion is fast at the equator. Oh wait, equinox. Oh wait, equator, equinox, right. And Capricorn, Tropic of Capricorn. The sun is shining overhead at midday for all locations on the Tropic of Capricorn at December solstice. It is not aligned to the constellation of the Sea Goat. It's aligned to the constellation of the Archer, and yet NASA is not insisting that we start calling that the Tropic of Sagittarius, or that in 2,000 years we call it the Tropic of Scorpio, because that's where December solstice sun will be aligned then. I mean, at some point, because signs and constellations are different things, we're going to have to keep the name of 12 for 12 of them and move on for the others. But what I hope I'm showing you is that the constellations, I believe, were named for the energies of the signs, like the crab moving sideways, like the horns of the ram, like the scales of the sun setting due west, right? And like this. So this is the old glyph for Capricorn. And I like to draw a little circumpunct, the sun symbol, by putting a dot in the circle. And what I'll show you is just throughout the course of the year, if we model it this way, and we can, the sun will climb from shining overhead from the Tropic of Capricorn down below, as we in the north at least say, and find its way back to the equator line at equinox time. And I believe this is what the old Capricorn glyph, the so-called 76, shows us. So these glyphs themselves unlock many of these keys of the mysteries. Now, I just said down below. Isn't that northern hemispheric, right? Maybe southern hemisphoric. Why the heck could northern people say south is down below, like Australia? I mean, for Australia, Alaska's down below, right? It's a matter of perspective. And so this is a very important thing because we've seen that the signs and the constellations do not align. Very true to NASA's claim. But I hope I've shown you the evidence of the directional zodiac to support the very real astronomy of the tropical zodiac. Astrology is not just some symbolic language that's not astronomical because the signs and constellations don't align. No, it's based on the astronomy of Earth's spin, day, and Earth's orbit year, okay? And I think leaning this way is going to feel different if the sun is pulling you in that direction than it is if it's pulling you in the opposite direction, and everything in between, maybe the 12 stations in between, or the 360 degrees in between even. So many astrologers will respond to these attacks, and they are attacks that attempt to debunk astrology by saying that the signs and the constellations don't align. Many will respond by saying, no, it's not about constellations, it's about the seasons, right? That Libra is the beginning of autumn time, but Scorpio, when we go into the darkness, is when it's getting cold and the branches are bare. And, so we often teach the archetypes of the signs in this way, but there's a problem here because while Scorpio might be the middle of autumn for the northern hemisphere, it's the middle of spring for the southern hemisphere. So why don't we have to flip this whole thing on its head and honor that these seasonal alignments are opposite? So it can open amazing portals of study, like Scorpio and Taurus are two sides of one thing, and autumn and spring are two sides of one thing, and etc. But this is what's so important, is that regardless of where you live, regardless of your days are getting longer after December solstice as the sun climbs, and I'll use that word climbs, from the Tropic of Capricorn to the equator equinox time, then eventually to the Tropic of Cancer when the sun ingresses tropical Cancer at June solstice time. Regardless of where you live, the sun is moving north on Earth. And this is the key to the truth of why we don't have to flip the archetypal energies of the 12 signs, though the seasonal energies of the northern hemisphere are flipped in respect to those of the southern hemisphere, aren't they? And that is true. Can we really say that tropical astrology is a seasonal thing? Well, I mean, that we're entering the middle of autumn in the northern hemisphere while the southern hemisphere is entering the middle of spring is still seasonal. So you can say that, but do you mean that the signs result from the seasonal energies? Like one thing that is often claimed is that, as according to the astrological rules, that the sun rules Leo because that's the hottest time of the year. That's only true for half the globe, friends. And maybe 80% of folks live up there, and there's certainly a lot more land mass in the north than there is in the south. But Leo is the middle of winter. Tropical Leo is the middle of winter for half the globe. So can we really say that this is why the sun rules Leo? I mean, it opens very important problems for tropical astrology that we should dive into and address and embrace. And if we do, we'll figure out more of the truth of astrology as the poetic breath of nature, not just some symbolic language alone. So here in this presentation, you see me diving full on into this challenge that astronomy claims to debunk astrology by saying your signs and constellations don't align. Well, they're ignoring the very real astronomy of the tropical zodiac, which I can express like this at least, and astronomers better agree. But this is a stretch. Why do those 4 points lead to 12 signs? All right, so you'll see that I had some broadcasting complications as I tried to show that geometrically and also audibly, didn't I, right? So maybe that wasn't meant to be shown, and they say those with ears let them hear. But anyway, why don't we have to flip this on its head between the hemispheres? And the reason is that it's about the directions. And this was not known in Newton's time when he defined what is still taught in school as the reason for precession. I'll get back to that. That the sun is not, we knew at this point, like post-Copernican revolution, thanks to some of the, evidence provided by the likes of Galileo, that the sun was at the center of the thing, that this is a heliocentric cosmology. But Newton lived in a reality where the sun was not moving through space, and we know this is true now in many ways. And this is called the apex of the sun's way. And I'm very grateful for this Earth Sky. I love that website, by the way. earthsky.org is a wonderful place to play. But I'm very grateful to this article, which provided a quick response to me, even though I was asking through the World Wide Web in September of 2018. Somehow I got to this headline that wouldn't be posted until January of 2019, when I asked myself, wait a second, which way through space is the sun moving? Because as the sun moves through space, you better believe she's bringing the planets with her, you see? And the answer is north. Not due north, that in our time is Polaris, but the sun is moving away from Sirius towards Vega. That's the accepted thing. And you know what this was known about actually is back in the day, like William Herschel looked at the apex of the sun's way. So that's like, he found Uranus, I know a date, 1781, right? So we've known about this for some time. I mean, Newton was before then. So why does this matter? We're moving away from Sirius and towards Vega. Well, listen, Vega never sets at Earth's North Pole. Sirius never rises at Earth's North Pole. Sirius never sets at Earth's South Pole. Vega never rises at Earth's South Pole. And at another time, and we'll look at this, Vega actually is our North Star. So we're moving, generally speaking, towards the direction we on Earth call north, through space, right? So we're spinning, daily motion, we're orbiting, yearly motion, and then with the apex of the sun's way, a solar system motion, we're moving generally towards the direction north. Yeah? So astrologers, this is for astrologers, when you say the north node, and that's where a planet crosses the ecliptic heading north, and we say that's future, it literally is true. And where it crosses towards the south, it's looking to the past. It is literally true. And this directional essence, just like the June solstice sun is rising at its northern extreme, whether you're living in Alaska or Australia, or the December solstice is rising at its southern extreme, whether you're in Minnesota or Buenos Aires, that directional nature of the tropical zodiac, the seasons result from the direction just like the tropical zodiac results from the directions, and Earth has a directional movement with sun through space. And this, in short, is, and we could speak about that for hours, is why I will say the signs of the tropical zodiac do not need to be flipped from the north to the south hemisphere, because they are not seasonal. They result from the directions as the seasons also do. That's the one I'm looking for. And why 12? Well, creation creates in 12s. Play with a compass and a square. Play with a keyboard, and you'll hear more about that. So Galileo Galilei, why did you think this is a Taurus moon, dude? It's clearly aligned to the constellation Aries. And he says, what? NASA, you think I'm a dunce? You think I haven't spent time with the sky? Have you? Aries is the point where the planes of day and year cross as the sun is moving directional zodiac north of the equator, as the signs are moving north of the equator, as the plane of year crosses the plane of day to the north. Earth astrology, Earth astronomy. Saturn has her own, Jupiter has his own, etc. Okay? And so there's 0 Aries. And where the ecliptic year and equator day most diverge, with the ecliptic at its northern extreme from the equator, at its most northern declination, 0 Cancer. And in between, Gemini and Taurus. And that is why, friends, in the very real astronomy of the tropical zodiac, in the directional zodiac, that is why this is a Taurus moon, regardless of its constellational alignment at that time or this. So we'll see both of these circles by taking the ground away, as the software allows us to play in cool ways. And it's really doing things that we can do with our mind, but it's really facilitating that adventure too. February 16th, 1564, Galileo's birth. And I'm looking at the natural zodiac, that's the golden curve, the circle of spirit, the ecliptic plane, but where it crosses the blue circle, the circle of matter, the celestial equator, on the left and the right, the equinox points, you see them described not by the constellations, Ram and Scales, but by the cusps of the signs, Aries and Libra, the cardinal directions, Aries and Libra, east and west. And at the top, 0 Capricorn, which is most south of the celestial equator, and at the bottom, 0 Cancer, which is most north of the celestial equator. And we are going to move 555 years into the future from Galileo's birth to this time of 2019. And you will see, I'll direct your attention to the Capricorn glyph here at the top of the screen. And I just want you to see that move slightly in that time to the center of the galaxy, the cosmic serpent. And now this is a very important thing. And it's also a tale for another time that was written in Maya Stele and also written in an article recently by myself called The Turning of the Ages, where I'm transmitting much of the wisdom that I learned through the teachings of Daniel Gemario and the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School, through my own, also expanded through my own study with the greatest professor, which is the heavens and earth. All right. And it's called The Turning of the Ages, Astronomy for Astrologers. There's a link down there below. You can find this in the Career Astrologer magazine. It's a very short article. I'll be speaking about this in India at the IBC conference in February of 2020. But I'll direct your attention to this beautiful image created by myself and the beautiful Anna Zaharia, Arts of the Chart. That's our logo down there at the bottom, Gemini, Brett, and Scorpiana, of the 3 zodiacs. What do you mean 3 zodiacs? Well, NASA's zodiac is in the middle, constellational zodiac. They are very right. It is not of equal sign size, if you will, right? Like they say, the sun moves through the constellation of Virgo for 45 days, and through other constellations for a lesser time. Oh, you'll notice Ophiuchus doesn't show up here anyway. However, 12, creation creates in 12s. But the constellations, as accurately described by NASA's challenge, do not divide the ecliptic circle, which is the golden circle here, into 12 equal slices of 30 degrees. Very right. What is very wrong is your belief that astrology is a constellational thing. Now, there are rumors of constellational zodiacs, and I guess NASA's trying to have a renaissance in that regard, so good on ya, I guess. But as long as you're having that renaissance, at least honor also what the science of the times is honoring. And there's 2 different principal philosophies of astrology. And in some ways, it's principally Western and Eastern, but not completely. There's a very true sidereal Western tradition, as there is also a tropical Eastern tradition, okay? But for the most part, our astrologer counterparts in India, practicing what we often call Vedic or Jyotish astrology, are working with what's known as a sidereal zodiac. And that's shown on the purple here, on the outer ring, okay? And you'll see that those names of the signs more accurately align to the constellations. Like look at Sagittarius in purple at the top. See how the purple space is aligned to the Archer, and go left, Capricorn aligned to the Goat. But also some of the water bearer. Go, counterclockwise, go to Aquarius on the purple, and you'll see it's aligned to the water bearer, but a little bit of the fish. Pisces, all fish. Purple Aries, and you get the whole ram, but you also get part of the fish, okay? This is sidereal zodiac. Many believe that that is the constellational zodiac, but it's not, because NASA's right. The constellations do not divide the ecliptic circle of 360 degrees into 12 pretty slices of 30. It just doesn't, never can. And in fact, most sidereal zodiacs that I know are defined by aligning 0 degrees Libra to the star Spica, which is a star in the constellation of Virgo. So it's a tricky thing. And the sidereal zodiac in our day and age, and this changes daily, really, the purple zodiac is off from the blue zodiac in the inner circle, which is the tropical zodiac, by about 24 degrees. So my sun sign is the first degree of tropical Scorpio in the tropical zodiac. And I have to subtract about 24 degrees to find my way to 7 degrees Libra for the sidereal zodiac, right? So I'm right here in blue, and then up here in Libra in the purple, and yet in between in the constellation Virgo. So am I Scorpio, am I Libra, am I Virgo? Hence Gemini Brett. And there's other reasons too, like a tropical Gemini moon and a tropical and sidereal Gemini moon, I should say. And that my horoscopus, my ascendant, my hour marker in the tropical sign of Gemini. At the bright eye of the bull, Aldebaran. It's a confusing thing, friends. So it's easier to just run away and say, oh, astrology is just a symbolic language. Okay, and it is that, and that's a beautiful and important thing. And I'm sorry to wave my hands like this because there's people I very much respect who say that, but it's because astrology has been so divorced from astronomy that in our study we don't often learn the very real astronomy of the tropical zodiac to respond to these attacks by those who would debunk us, who are supposed to be the astronomy authorities. They should very easily see the very real astronomy of the tropical zodiac because it's basically basic Earth astronomy, day and year, right? And hopefully you see that more now. And hopefully you're also saying, I want to learn more of this and going deeper into this. And I'll show you ways you can do that shortly with me. But the best teacher, Earth and Sky. So the tropical zodiac in the center, aligned to the cardinal directions. Now, this changes over time. And eventually I'll make an animation of this, where I'll keep the blue aligned to the cardinal directions, and I'll move the constellations and the sidereal, the purple, about. And in this way, it would be the constellations in the purple, the sidereal zodiac, would shift counterclockwise about the blue tropical zodiac in the middle, which would stay fixed to the cardinal directions, or I could take the blue in the cardinal directions and move it clockwise through the zodiac. And this you may have heard is precession of the equinoxes. Okay, we're going to see this in some other slides. This is due to this axial precession, because look, as north and south move through space and align to different stars, like here are north stars over time. This is Polaris, as we call it now, but didn't always. We call it Polaris or North Star because it's a pole star. It's the North Star, the North Celestial Pole, or the terrestrial pole pointing to that place in space is now aligned to Polaris, you see? Well, it wasn't always that. 2,000 years ago, it was this blank place in space. There's no southern pole star right now, but there is at other times. There's not always a northern pole star. We actually have, according to this model, which is the currently astronomically accepted model, this image from Wikipedia, by the way, which is a great article on axial precession. You'll get there also if you search precession of the equinoxes, okay? In 2,000 years, it's going to be aligned to the star in Cepheus, right? 5,000 years ago to Thuban of Draco, who amazingly, and especially where the dragon, Draco, dragon constellation, holds that crystal ball with his little hand, is at the ecliptic pole, or the center of all North stars over the time called the Great Year, which is typically expressed as about 26,000 years. Some have said 24,000. The old numerological suggestion is this, that precession, this third motion, this so-called wobble of the axis, and some have called into debate that it's not a product of Earth's wobble, but that's a tale for another time too. I address it a bit in that article I mentioned before, but just a bit. That the precessional rate shifts the equinox points, okay? Precess means a backward motion through the constellations of the zodiac by 1 degree of the 360 degrees every 72 years. 72 years per 1 degree times 360 degrees is 25,920 years. A twelfth of that is 2,160 years. These periods are known about 26,000 years as the Great Year, or the Platonic year, and then about 2,160 years as an astrological age, like the age of the fish or the dawning of the age of Aquarius, something you might have heard of. All due to this. But what is this due to? Newton, who was basing his theory on a static sun, sun's not moving through space, said that this was mostly precession due to the forces, gravitational forces of sun and moon pulling on Earth's equatorial bulge, that the Earth is not a perfect sphere because it spins, it's flattened at the equator, the equatorial radius is longer than the polar radius, and there's this, as I like to say, maybe rudely so, muffin top of the Earth that the moon and the sun can kind of pull on, and all the other planets and things too. That's Newton's theory. That's what's taught in school today. They teach us about a wobbling top, even though the Earth isn't spinning on some surface, is it? But others have said this is because of the sun's motion through space. Modern astronomy's response is it's not moving at a fast enough rate for us to notice precession at the rate in which we do. They say the rate is not exactly 72 years. There's a lot of difference of opinion here, and it's a very important thing and a cool thing to study. But I just want to share another slide that's kind of complicated to see. We're going to look at this image that we've seen, the very real astronomy of the Tropical Zodiac, which is currently like oriented to Earth's plane of day, right? The equatorial plane, the circle of matter. And we're going to shift it here to make the ecliptic plane, the circle of spirit, the yearly plane at the horizontal. And then we're going to jump into this wild thing. And I'm not going to do too much here. I described this in some length in the article I mentioned above, Career Astrologer, which is the wonderful publication by the Organization for Professional Astrology, who you find at OPA, OPA, astrology.org. But what this is trying to show is the precession of the polar axes, which aligns to different stars over the course of time. And of course, as north and south are shifting through the heavens, so are east and west. And they precess through the constellations, which here are represented by the 12 equal divisions of the ecliptic plane from the sidereal perspective, from the tropical perspective, which is the directions, cardinal signs, cardinal directions, are going to precess through the constellations. So we'll watch just a little bit of that together. I'm going to bring against the constellations, I'm going to bring in the tropical zodiac as it aligns always, but with the constellational images as it is aligned today. You can see the 0 Aries point over here in the head of the fish, and some will say that means we are still in the age of Pisces, because the east point of the center of the Earth is like the ascendant for us all, the global horoscopus, if you will, and therefore the constellation to which it is currently aligned determines the age. So they say, but that's a constellational perspective, maybe a sidereal perspective, but not really, because the constellations do not divide the circle into 12 equal slices. All right, so tale for another time. But I will just show you again as we bring the north and the east and the south to their appropriate, in the west to their appropriate positions in the tropical zodiac, the directional zodiac, right, which are the cusps of the cardinal signs, cardinal, see? I will just show you an image of precession, which is the truth. Actually, this looks like I'm going back in time. I am. And I'm just realizing that I copied the wrong slide from a previous presentation. But this is actually going back in time, which will show the equinox point going through the order of the signs of which we are familiar. And so I'm just going to show this now at a few different times. This is now, or at least it was last week when I gave this presentation in Sacramento. 0 Aries currently aligned to the head of the fish. You can see over here, 0 Capricorn right in the galactic bulge. Very powerful place of space. And this is a very powerful thing indeed. 0 Libra aligned to the head of the priestess. 0 Cancer, as the Celtics said, the hand of the high man, the club of Orion. Also a very important thing. Read more about that in the article I mentioned before. 2160 years later, we find 0 Aries in the belly of the water bearer. This is way past the dawning of the age of Aquarius. Still let the sunshine in. And 0 Capricorn in the scales, and 0 Libra in the lion, actually fixed at this time, 4179 AD, 2160 years from now, at the bright star. It said the royal star that rules them all, the heart of the lion Regulus. Okay. 2160 years later, and you can see they shift. 2160 years later, okay, and we get back to this, which I guess is 2160 now, right? So, again, since the Babylonians already had a 12-month calendar based on the phases of the moon, each month got a slice of the zodiac all to itself. Friends, bad astronomy. NASA, bad astronomy. Mimi believes that when she says she's a Leo, the line from Earth through the sun is pointing to the constellation of Leo. Bad astrology. That is not what we believe. So Mimi's going to come in here, friends, and blast those dunce caps off of our heroes. And Kepler, I think, can embrace this great, wise, learned, tropical astrologer, Mimi, who NASA is trying to deface. But as they do, they're making the same claim of ignorance against Kepler and Galileo and many of the masters too. Don't do that. Astronomers, if you want to know more about astrologers, ask us. And then debunk us. But at least do so in terms of knowing where we're coming from. And let's honor the truth that things are changing. I just had the opportunity to speak to some astronomers and astrologers alike at ArtMix Cosmos, this great event that Crocker Art Museum in Sacramento, California put together. I looked later as I was doing mini readings in another room up and saw this amazing, beautiful image of horned masks. And I thought of Taurus, and I thought of Uranus, a planet that we say in many ways represents astrology because, like the discovery of Uranus broke us out of the limits of what is visible only to our senses, astrology can do the same. And Uranus has recently moved into tropical Taurus to become Taurinus. And I saw, and true to one of the many beautiful images of the Taurus archetype, embodied in sensual art in these masks of old. And I thought how wonderful this opportunity to bring mystical, the why astrology, and material, the what astronomy together. Let us do that again and reclaim the wisdom of old and move it forward. So this very fuzzy image as well on astrology and nonsense and superstition. Thanks to my friend Peter Jeffs, who responded to me posting that on my Facebook page. He wrote to Goodreads, and you can see this here. And Sophia from Goodreads responded, "Do you know Sophia means wisdom?" And she said, "Oh, correct that problem." And so it's much more clear now. And the tags, no more nonsense, no more superstition, just astrology, which, my friends, is definitely a science. So thanks also to NCGR. I'll be sharing much of this wisdom and more there in November of this year. You can, at their Sacramento chapter, I spoke at their San Francisco chapter in January. It's always a treat. I've spoken in Santa Fe. It's a wonderful organization, as is the Organization for Professional Astrology, ISAR, ESAR. There's so many of these great, important organizations in astrology today, and I hope you'll look them up. Those of us who are devoted to the science of astrology, and one of my principal functions in this realm is through reconnecting to sacred astronomy. There is a why to this what. So if you want to find out more of that, you can find me, Gemini Brett, at morethan.astrology.com. And I really highly recommend you type your email in at morethan.astrology.com/free, and I will send you many gifts, including 6 hours, 12 short classes of sacred astronomy, so you can reconnect the living marriage of heaven and the earth to a deeper understanding. So thanks again to NCGR and to ArtMix Cosmos, and to this truth that the world is ready to recover from the burning times of old that forced the mystic traditions, those honored by heroes like Newton, Kepler, Galileo, and many more, that forced that mystery tradition underground, and it is resurfacing now. So let us be proud when we say, I am an astrologer. Thanks for tuning in, friends. You can find me at morethan.astrology.com if you would like to take a tour through your own sacred song, through the sacred astronomy point of view. Doing private sessions is one of my favorite things to do, as is this, presenting the very real astronomy of the Tropic Zodiac to debunk the principal claim by the debunkers. Astrology is the poetic breath of nature. See you in space.